Chapter 747. First level of the prison pagoda. Yi Xian had already devoured 5 godly swords, and his aura was getting stronger and stronger. Now that he was the king of the northern region, money was no longer something he had to worry about. He had no concept of money now. He only needed to say the word, and someone would find them for him. Not only the northern region, but the bound of universe and other powers were also providing him with resources. He only needed to work hard to become stronger, and he did not need to worry about resources at all. Such treatment was comfortable. At this moment, he finally understood the benefits of power. One word, and countless people would be busy for you. However, if he had to choose, he would rather be alone. Being free and unfettered, unencumbered by external affairs. That feeling was much more comfortable than what he was feeling now. Being at ease was the greatest freedom. Of course, he understood that this was not the time to talk about freedom. His current strength did not allow him to play around. He needed to unite the bound of universe and the other powers to fight against the temple. If not for the help of the Master of Universe and the other powers, the northern region would not have been able to defeat the temple. After all, there was still a significant difference in the number of sealed ascension experts on both sides. About 2 hours later, Yi Xian suddenly stood up. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly rippled out from his body. Yi Xian opened his eyes, and the sword light in them was like lightning. Moments later, Yi Xian closed his eyes. He clenched his right hand, and a powerful force gathered in his fist. Tendo Realm. He had now reached the Tendo Realm from the Mastery Realm, and above that was the Emperor Realm. The Emperor Realm was a watershed. As long as he reached the Emperor Realm, all aspects of him would be greatly improved, especially the power of the immeasurable sword. It would definitely increase several times over. He had many powerful trump cards, but he could not fully utilize their power. The reason was that his realm was too low, and he could not fully control them. As long as he reached the Emperor Realm, his strength would undergo a qualitative transformation. Although his realm was low, his physique was not. His current physique was at the peak of the sealed ascension realm, and with the help of the chosen Sky Dragon, it could be said that ordinary sealed ascension experts would not be able to hurt him. It could be said that he would not feel any pressure if he were to fight against a ascending Feng realm martial artist. Of course, if he were to go against that white-haired woman, then with his current strength, he would probably be in danger. A moment later, Yi Xian left the first floor and arrived at the entrance to the 8th floor. The 8th floor. In fact, he had always been curious about what the 8th floor was like. He had seen the strength of Jian Zizai and the Devil Master of the 5th and 6th floors. If those two were already so powerful, how powerful would the 8th and 9th floors be? After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Sir, shall we have a chat?" A voice sounded from the 8th floor. "All right." Yi Xian was overjoyed, but just as he was about to say something, Lian Qian suddenly appeared by his side. She glanced at the 8th floor and said, "If you don't want to die, let's talk." Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. "Why?" Lian Qian remained expressionless. "Let's go." With that, she took Yi Xian and left the World Prison Pagoda. Outside the pagoda, Lian Qian walked to the entrance of the main hall and said softly, "The 8th floor is not the Devil Master or Jian Zizai. Your strength is too inferior to theirs. You have no right to negotiate with them. Do you understand?" Yi Xian said in a low voice, "I control this pagoda." Lian Qian shook her head. "Not really. If you really did control this pagoda, you could do it with a single thought. Green City, Yi family, ancestral shrine. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as crown prince will be removed and Yi Lang will succeed him." The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi family. Why? At this moment, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi residence rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the crown prince position. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed, Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply, Subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man." "How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. "Pooh!" Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. "Why?" Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince." Impudent! The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap! A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall." Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu saw something, and suddenly stopped. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder squinted his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, brother, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 748. Yi Xian is challenging the Temple of God? At this moment, the entire bound of universe was in an uproar. In front of the Divine Palace's divine gate, Yi Xian was standing quietly. He was holding the executing heaven sword with a faint smile on his face. Meanwhile, a woman suddenly appeared before the heaven gates. It was a white-haired woman who emanated lightning. The white-haired woman looked at Yi Xian, who gave you the courage? Yi Xian smiled, cut the crap. Who will the Temple of God send to fight me? It won't be you, right? The white-haired woman said indifferently, can't I? Yi Xian smiled, tsk. I never expected the Temple of God to be so shameless. Look at me, I'm only 20 years old. What about you? You're at least tens of thousands of years old, right? Doesn't your conscience hurt if you fight me? The white-haired woman looked at Yi Xian, what? Are you here to argue with me? Yi Xian said, let the younger generation of the Temple of God fight me. The white-haired woman suddenly waved her right hand, and a wave of lightning surged out. Rumble. In an instant, Yi Xian was blasted 3 kilometers away. As soon as he stopped, the space where he stood collapsed. The white-haired woman glanced coldly at Yi Xian, one-on-one. Yi Xian, are you getting more and more stupid? Why would the Temple of God let the younger generation fight you one-on-one? It's a fight to the death. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly vanished. Hiss! A bolt of lightning tore through the battlefield. Nearby, Yi Xian's expression changed drastically. Damn it! This woman doesn't play by the rules. He didn't dare think too much about it, and he slashed forward with the executing heaven sword. Hiss! A ray of sword energy struck the bolt of lightning. Rumble! An explosion suddenly resounded in front of the heaven gates, and Yi Xian was instantly blasted 3 kilometers away. Before he could even stop, a wave of lightning engulfed him. This woman didn't hold back at all. Yi Xian's expression turned solemn. This woman wanted to kill him. Yi Xian didn't dare to hold back and immediately drew his sword. Buzz! A sword howl suddenly resounded. In the next moment, the expanse of lightning was directly blasted into pieces. At the same time, the white-haired woman retreated explosively by almost 300 m. By the time she stopped, Yi Xian had disappeared. Boundless sword. The white-haired woman glanced at her palm. There was a deep sword scar on her palm. The white-haired woman frowned as she looked at the sword mark. Yi Xian hurt her. She was very clear about the gap between her and Yi Xian, but at this moment, she suddenly realized that the gap wasn't that big. Yi Xian could hurt her. If she allowed Yi Xian to continue growing, wouldn't he be able to contend against her? How old was Yi Xian? He was only 20 years old. If he continued growing, thinking of this, the white-haired woman's eyes gradually turned cold. She glanced at the surroundings. Very quickly, the space around her started to boil. Countless bolts of lightning gathered, and in an instant, the space within hundreds of thousands of li was covered by her lightning. However, she didn't find Yi Xian's aura. It was as if Yi Xian had evaporated into thin air. The white-haired woman frowned. How is this possible? As soon as she finished speaking, she clenched her fist. The space around her started to shrink layer by layer, and it didn't take long for it to shrink into a strange shape. However, she still didn't find Yi Xian. He's not here? The white-haired woman frowned even deeper. What the hell? As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly waved her right hand. An expanse of lightning suddenly shook and descended towards Tianjiang City. Obviously, she wanted to force Yi Xian out. As expected, just as the lightning bolt was about to enter the Heaven River City, a sword light suddenly slashed at the lightning bolt. Bang! The lightning was directly shattered. At the same time, Yi Xian also appeared in the battlefield. In front of the heavenly gate, the white-haired woman looked down at Yi Xian. You're quite capable to actually injure me. Yi Xian looked at the white-haired woman. Can you not bully the weak? Let's have a fair fight. The white-haired woman sneered. Fair fight? My temple can obviously crush you. Why should I have a fair fight with you? Do you think I'm stupid? As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning and dove straight towards Yi Xian. Chi! Everywhere she passed, the space around her was annihilated. Thunder might. The moment the white-haired woman dove down, a monstrous thunder might enveloped the entire Tianjiang city. Her target was Yi Xian. However, if Yi Xian escaped, her target would be the entire Tianjiang city. With her strength, if she fell into Tianjiang city, the entire Tianjiang city would be turned into ashes. Her goal was to force Yi Xian to take her attack head-on. Yi Xian had no way out. Because behind him was Tianjiang city. Looking at the white-haired woman with lightning, Yi Xian's expression gradually turned cold. He held the executing heaven sword tightly in his right hand and a powerful sword essence gathered in his sword. There was a moment of silence. Hum. The sound of a sword suddenly shook the sky. Immeasurable sword. Facing the white-haired woman, he could only use this immeasurable sword. Only this immeasurable sword could cause harm to the white-haired woman. He struck out with his sword. Bang! The lightning was forced to a stop, but it did not disperse. The lightning and the sword were in a stalemate in the sky above Tianjiang city. After the lightning, the white-haired woman's lips curled into a ferocious smile. Suddenly, 2 balls of lightning appeared in her eyes. The next moment, 2 balls of lightning shot out. Rumble. The sword radiance was shattered instantly. The white-haired woman was about to launch another attack. However, Yi Xian had already disappeared without a trace. The white-haired woman squinted her eyes and clenched her fist. Imprison. The space within a radius of tens of thousands of li shook violently. At the same time, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of li was covered by lightning. A moment later, the white-haired woman frowned. What kind of concealment technique is this? It's so strange. Speaking of this, her pupils suddenly shrank and she turned around. As she turned around, a sword had already arrived between her eyebrows. However, the sword was blocked by a spot of lightning. But the next moment, bang! The spot of lightning exploded and the white-haired woman instantly retreated hundreds of zhang away. And at the place where the white-haired woman had been standing, Yi Xian had appeared out of nowhere. At this moment, Yi Xian's face was rather pale. Obviously, continuously using the immeasurable sword was a little too much for him. Opposite Yi Xian, the white-haired woman gently touched her eyebrows. A drop of blood slowly dripped down from between her eyebrows. She was injured again. The white-haired woman looked at the drop of blood on her fingertip in silence. A moment later, she looked at Yi Xian in the distance. What kind of sword skill is that? Sword skill. The difference between her and Yi Xian was extremely huge. However, that sword skill had actually made up for the difference in their realms. What kind of sword skill was that? At this moment, the white-haired woman was a little curious. Yi Xian looked at the white-haired woman. Immeasurable sword. The white-haired woman narrowed her eyes. Immeasurable sword. I've never heard of it. Speaking of this, she seemed to have thought of something and her pupils shrank. This sword skill contains a mysterious Dao law. This Dao law is not a fourth dimension Dao law. Your sword skill is beyond the fourth dimension. In other words, it's a fifth dimension Dao law. Fifth dimension. Yi Xian's face darkened. This woman's intelligence was extraordinarily high. Why did he have to encounter such an opponent? Couldn't she give him an opponent who was more retarded? The white-haired woman suddenly said in a deep voice, "You can actually use that tower to obtain such a sword skill." Speaking of this, she looked at Yi Xian. "I really can't let you live." Yi Xian smiled and said, "In the past, many people have said this. However, they have all." At this moment, the white-haired woman suddenly turned into a bolt of lightning and shot toward Yi Xian. Yi Xian's face darkened. Damn, this woman attacked just like that. The white-haired woman did not hold back. Obviously, she wanted to kill Yi Xian with one blow. This time, Yi Xian did not counterattack. He turned around and ran at an extremely fast speed. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared into the depths of the starry sky. The battlefield could not be in Tianjiang City. Otherwise, he would be restrained everywhere. He had to take this woman away. However, when he turned around and ran into the depths of the starry sky, the white-haired woman did not follow him. Instead, she turned around and rushed toward Tianjiang City. Seeing this, Yi Xian's face changed. This woman did not follow him. He had no choice but to turn back. At this moment, the white-haired woman stopped. She turned around and looked at Yi Xian. "Run away. Why don't you run away?" Yi Xian stared at the white-haired woman. His right hand tightly held the executing heaven sword in his hand. If he wanted to kill this woman in front of him, a simple infinite sword would definitely not work. He had to use his true trump card. The immortal slaying sword gourd? The 6 paths of truth? Just as Yi Xian was hesitating, a woman suddenly appeared in front of him. Jian Zizai. Seeing Jian Zizai, Yi Xian immediately breathed a sigh of relief. If she did not appear, he would really have to fight this white-haired woman to the death. Now, if Jian Zizai stalled this white-haired woman, then no one in the temple would be a match for him. Seeing Jian Zizai, the white-haired woman's face suddenly darkened. In the entire northern region, only Jian Zizai could be evenly matched with her. Once Jian Zizai stalled her, who would suppress Yi Xian? Who would suppress Yi Xian, who had a belly full of evil tricks? Jian Zizai suddenly said, "You go." Yi Xian nodded and was about to leave, and the white-haired woman suddenly raised her head. Activate the Thunder God formation. Don't let this person step into the gate of heaven. The white-haired woman's voice fell, boom. In an instant, countless bolts of lightning suddenly gathered in the sky above the gate of heaven. A terrifying pressure swept down, and the whole world trembled. The Thunder God formation. Below, Yi Xian's face was a little ugly. This woman was really ruthless. Without thinking too much, Yi Xian directly turned into a sword light and soared into the sky. Force his way through. He had to force his way through. He had to get rid of the current experts of the temple before that so-called god arrived. The moment Yi Xian rushed out, the experts of the ascending Feng realm of the northern region also rushed out one after another. This battle must be won. Otherwise, when that so-called god arrived and these people joined forces, the situation of the northern region would become extremely bad. Below, the white-haired woman stared at Jian Zizai. "You will pay a painful price for your stupid actions." Jian Zizai said with a smile, "If you kill her, you will also pay a painful price." "No, your entire temple will pay a painful price." The white-haired woman grinned. "You will never know how powerful a god is." Jian Zizai said softly, "You will never know how powerful that woman is." The white-haired woman's smile became more and more ferocious. "What, is she stronger than a god? P.S. I'm ashamed that I haven't been updating well recently. I want to be scolded today. As long as it doesn't involve my family, everyone can scold me." Chapter 749. A God? Jian Zizai shook her head. She didn't know how strong the god of legend was, but she knew how strong the woman in a plain dress was. The woman in a plain dress. She was a person who was strong to the point of being unreasonable. The two of them didn't get along, and it didn't take long for them to enter into battle once more. On the other hand, Yi Xian had charged over to the lightning formation, and he held the executing heaven sword with both hands as he slashed upwards. Hiss! A ray of light surged out from the tip of the executing heaven sword. Hiss! Hiss! In an instant, countless bolts of lightning in the sky above Tianjiang city were torn apart by the ray of light. As the experts of the northern territory caught up to them, the lightning formation that enveloped them grew fewer and fewer. The expressions of the experts behind the lightning formation turned unsightly when they witnessed this scene. At this moment, they finally realized that Yi Xian wasn't someone that just anyone could suppress. He'd become a huge threat. Suddenly, the white-haired woman's voice resounded from below. "Enter the heaven entrance and activate defensive mode." The experts hurriedly retreated into the heaven entrance when they heard her. Suddenly, a ray of light tore through the lightning formation, and it didn't take long for the divine lightning that covered the sky to vanish without a trace. Yi Xian and the others appeared before the heaven entrance. The heaven entrance was a door, and it was tightly shut at this moment. Yi Xian walked over to the heaven entrance, and then he raised his hand and slashed with his sword. Hiss! The heaven entrance trembled violently as a deep mark appeared on it, but it didn't take long for it to be repaired. Yi Xian frowned when he witnessed this scene, and then he slashed down once more. Hiss! A hole was torn open on the heaven entrance, but it was repaired in an instant. Yi Xian's face sank. The heaven entrance's ability to repair was actually so formidable. Right at this moment, a voice suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. Spatial Dao Law. Yi Xian was slightly stunned, and then he said, "Can I?" Lian Qian said, "Of course you can." Inside this door is a space of its own. Since it's a space, your space Dao law will allow you to enter directly. This four-dimensional space Dao law won't be able to block your space Dao law. Yi Xian nodded, and then he immediately activated the space Dao law. It didn't take long for him to sense the space within the sky gate. A moment later, he clenched his right fist tightly, and in the blink of an eye, he and all the powerhouses of the northern region vanished from sight. Rumble. The surrounding space violently trembled. When Yi Xian and the others reappeared, they were already in the clouds. Not far in front of them, there was a huge floating palace. The palace was extremely magnificent, more magnificent than any building Yi Xian had ever seen. The palace was at least a few hundred meters tall. It was a dazzling sight, as if it was forged from gold. In front of the palace stood two golden giants, each wielding a golden spear. The two golden giants were over 100 meters tall, and they emitted an invisible pressure. Besides that, there was a golden statue of a middle-aged man riding a Pegasus in front of the statues. The middle-aged man held a short sword in his left hand, and his gaze was deep and carried a trace of killing intent. He seemed like a god of war. A group of experts from the Divine Hall stood before the middle-aged man's statue. There weren't many of them, only around 30 of them, and the person in the lead was the Divine Hall's Divine Master. The Divine Master gazed at Yi Xian. "Yi Xian, how dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly said, "Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged forward. "Oam!" The howl of a sword suddenly resounded through the surroundings. The Divine Master's eyes narrowed slightly when he witnessed this scene. He suddenly stretched his left hand forward lightly, and a strange barrier of talismans appeared in front of him. Meanwhile, the sword arrived. Bang! The barrier of talismans shook violently before cracking apart. Meanwhile, Yi Xian slashed down once more. Bang! The barrier of talismans suddenly shattered, but at that moment, a talisman chain suddenly wrapped around his body. Soon, a mysterious power began to corrode his body, but in the next moment, the talisman chain was directly shattered by Yi Xian's executing heaven sword. At that moment, the Divine Master had already retreated hundreds of feet away. He waved his right hand, and suddenly, countless fireballs suddenly appeared in the sky. In the blink of an eye, those fireballs had already arrived above Yi Xian's head. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the executing heaven sword suddenly flew out. Swish! A sword light vibrated from the tip of the executing heaven sword, and in an instant, those fireballs were directly torn apart. However, at that moment, thumb-sized black talismans suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. Wherever these talismans passed, the space would be directly burned and turned into nothingness. Sensing the power contained in these talismans, Yi Xian's expression changed slightly, and he suddenly stomped his right foot. Swish! A sword light flashed across the battlefield. Immeasurable sword. Wherever the sword light passed, those black talismans immediately vanished into thin air. On the opposite side, the moment Yi Xian disappeared, the Divine Master's pupils shrank. In the next moment, a blue energy shield suddenly appeared in front of him. Sword arrival. Boom! The blue energy shield instantly disappeared, and the Divine Master instantly retreated. In the process, every inch of his body collapsed. However, where he originally stood, which was also where Yi Xian was now, the space there suddenly turned into a ball of flames and the space there suddenly burned. Rumble. In an instant, Yi Xian also retreated rapidly. After retreating hundreds of feet, he finally stopped. At that moment, his entire body was now red, as if his flesh was being steamed. Seriously injured. This time, his physical body also could not completely withstand the power of the flames. At that moment, Yi Xian's entire body was trembling, and at that moment, all the cells in his body were dying at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, Yi Xian hurriedly said, Xiaoling, Hearing Yi Xian's words, Xiaoling, suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, holding many spiritual fruits in her arms. Regardless of what these spiritual fruits were for, Yi Xian ate them like crazy. Endless energy spread out from his body, and gradually, his physical body began to recover. It was recovering. Sensing this scene, Yi Xian immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, it was recovering, otherwise, his physical body would probably be gone. Yi Xian looked at a golden spiritual fruit in his hand. His physical body could recover slowly because of this golden spiritual fruit. Yi Xian looked at Xiaoling, and said, grow more of this. Xiaoling hurriedly nodded. Yi Xian gently rubbed Xiaoling's small head and smiled, go in. After Xiaoling entered the world prison pagoda, Yi Xian looked at God Sage not far away. At this moment, this God Sage only had his soul left. Although the sword just now did not directly kill him, it cut through his physical body. God Sage looked at Yi Xian, and his soul began to tremble. Countless black runes danced around him. Yi Xian opened his palm, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. In the next moment, he directly disappeared. Soul-suppressing sword. This sword was specifically aimed at the soul. The moment Yi Xian disappeared, God Sage also disappeared. In the battlefield, countless black runes rushed towards Yi Xian like ghosts. Sword arrived. Chi. With a tearing sound, Yi Xian appeared where God Sage originally stood. 100 feet behind Yi Xian, God Sage stopped, and his eyes were dull. Why? At this moment, a sword was stabbed in between his eyebrows, and this sword was madly absorbing his soul. God Sage's eyes were filled with disbelief. In his opinion, even as a soul, he could still fight against Yi Xian. However, he did not expect that he would be so weak. Gone just like that. Soon, God Sage completely disappeared. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and the soul-suppressing sword appeared in his hand. At this time, Soul's excited voice suddenly sounded in his mind, young lord, I'm going to break through. I'm going to break through. Yi Xian burst out laughing. Let's break through then. Okay. Soul directly entered the world prison pagoda after saying that. Yi Xian glanced around. At the moment, the strong people from the northern region had completely suppressed the sacred hall. Victory was only a matter of time. Yi Xian withdrew his gaze and walked towards the hall. He felt a presence inside the hall. A presence that made him feel danger. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the hall. He was about to enter when a powerful force suddenly attacked him from behind. Yi Xian turned around and a flash of lightning appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was about to make a move when Jian Zizai appeared in front of him. With a wave of her right hand, the flash of lightning was directly shattered. Not far away from Jian Zizai was the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman looked coldly at Yi Xian. Well done, Yi Xian. I didn't expect you to make the first move. Yi Xian turned and walked towards the hall. The more this woman did not let him enter, the more he wanted to enter. Seeing Yi Xian walking towards the hall, the white-haired woman slightly narrowed her eyes. She wanted to make a move, but in the end, she did not because Jian Zizai was there. With Jian Zizai blocking her, it would be pointless for her to make a move. Just like that, Yi Xian entered the hall. However, in the next moment, Yi Xian's entire body flew out. This time, he flew nearly 3,000 meters away. Jian Zizai's eyes narrowed slightly as he turned to look at the hall. From within the hall, a man whose entire body was emitting golden light walked out. The man glanced coldly at Yi Xian and the others in the distance. Ants, how dare you offend the might of a god? As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and a golden light surged out. At this moment, Jian Zizai suddenly blasted out with a punch. Rumble. The golden light was forced to a stop, and at this moment, the man suddenly disappeared. In an instant, countless afterimages of golden light drowned Jian Zizai. Bang, 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 explosions resounded continuously amidst the afterimages of golden light. At this moment, the white-haired woman suddenly rushed towards the golden light. Obviously, she wanted to join forces with the man to deal with Jian Zizai first. Currently, the strongest combat force in the northern region was Jian Zizai. As long as she dealt with him, she could fight the entire northern region by herself. Yi Xian's expression changed when he saw the white-haired woman rush towards Jian Zizai. He was about to rush over when a one-legged man suddenly appeared in front of him. Yi Xian was stunned. Who was this guy? The one-legged man sized up Yi Xian, and then his expression relaxed slightly. This, little brother, can you come with me? He was quite respectful towards Yi Xian because he didn't know what the relationship between this guy and the woman in the plain dress was. In any case, their relationship was definitely not simple. Be humble. Keep a low profile. Definitely. Yi Xian was stunned for a moment, and then he said, "Big brother, I'm fighting right now." With that, he was about to rush out when the one-legged man suddenly said, I'll help you fight. Yi Xian stopped and looked at the one-legged man. What's your name, big brother? The one-legged man was speechless. Chapter 750. At this moment, Yi Xian was quite shocked in his heart. Because he hadn't noticed how the one-legged man had appeared just now. Moreover, the one-legged man was standing right in front of him, but he couldn't sense the man at all. An expert. He was absolutely an extraordinary expert. The one-legged man gazed at Yi Xian. Zui. Zui? Yi Xian nodded slightly, and then he pointed at the golden figure in the distance. Hit that white-haired woman. The one-legged man nodded. Come with me after you're done. Yi Xian didn't even think about it. No problem. Jian Zizai was absolutely unable to resist the two of them, so someone had to keep the white-haired woman busy. Otherwise, Jian Zizai would be in danger. The one-legged man nodded slightly when he heard Yi Xian. Move back a little. Yi Xian glanced at the one-legged man, and then he moved back. The one-legged man said again, 3 kilometers away. The corners of Yi Xian's eyes twitched slightly. He didn't say anything, and he really did move 3 kilometers back. The one-legged man turned around to gaze at the golden figure in the distance, and then he slowly closed his eyes and clenched his fist. In the next moment, he punched towards the distance from afar. Rumble. In an instant, the golden figure in the distance was blasted into pieces while the white-haired woman was instantly blasted 3 kilometers back. As soon as she stopped moving, the space behind her collapsed. At this moment, everyone here was shocked, and they gazed at the one-legged man who stood in front of Yi Xian. Where did he come from? Yi Xian was quite dumbstruck as well. He's so strong. The white-haired woman stared fixedly at the one-legged man while a wisp of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of her mouth. Jian Zizai and the man with golden light stopped moving as well, and both of them gazed at the one-legged man. The white-haired woman gazed at the one-legged man. Who are you? The one-legged man didn't answer her. He turned around to look at Yi Xian. Do you still want to fight? Yi Xian nodded, and then he pointed at the white-haired woman. Beat her to death. The one-legged man hesitated for a moment before he said, You have to come with me later. You're not allowed to go back on your word. Yi Xian sternly said, I won't go back on my word. The one-legged man nodded. He looked at the white-haired woman not far away, and in the next moment, he suddenly disappeared. Chi. Space was instantly torn apart. Not far away, the white-haired woman narrowed her eyes. She clapped her hands together and a bolt of lightning shot out from her palms. Rumble. Along with an explosion, the expanse of lightning collapsed into pieces. At the same time, the white-haired woman retreated explosively once more. But she hadn't even stopped moving when a ray of light suddenly appeared behind her. It was a sudden strike. Boundless sword. The expression on the white-haired woman's face changed drastically. She suddenly let out a furious roar, and her entire body transformed into a bolt of lightning, disappearing on the spot. Chi! A tearing sound resounded. After a breath of time, the white-haired woman was already several thousand feet to the right. But at this moment, she only had her right hand left. Just now, Yi Xian's sword had directly taken away her entire left arm. Yi Xian looked at the white-haired woman and thought that it was a pity that he couldn't finish her off with a single strike. This woman's reaction was too fast. The white-haired woman glanced coldly at Yi Xian, and then she gazed at the one-legged man. Who exactly are you? The one-armed man gazed at Yi Xian. Do you still want to fight? Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. Can you kill her? The one-armed man thought for a moment and said, I'll give it a try. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly vanished on the spot. The white-haired woman's eyes narrowed slightly while a wisp of a ferocious expression flashed through them. A moment later, she suddenly clenched her right hand, and a blade of lightning appeared in her grasp. In the blink of an eye, she swiftly slashed forward. Hiss! Lightning shot towards the surroundings as soon as she slashed down. Rumble! The one-legged man immediately swung his fist. He punched forward. Bang! The expanse of lightning exploded apart, and then both of them instantly retreated explosively. As they retreated, the white-haired woman swung her blade madly, causing numerous bolts of lightning to shoot forward. The one-legged man opened his palm, and then he pressed it forward lightly. The lightning instantly became illusory, and then he suddenly clenched his fist. Bang! All the lightning vanished. The one-legged man spun his right hand towards the white-haired woman from afar. Shatter! As soon as he finished speaking, the space around the white-haired woman in the distance started to be sliced apart layer by layer. The white-haired woman's expression changed drastically as she flicked her sleeve, and then a myriad of bolts of lightning surged out from within it. Rumble! That expanse of space was directly obliterated, and countless bolts of lightning and a powerful force raged ceaselessly within the pitch-black spatial black hole. Not far away, Yi Xian's expression was solemn. The two people before him, Jian Zizai, and the man with golden light, were the true experts. If he hadn't relied on the infinite sword when he fought the white-haired woman earlier, then he probably wouldn't have been able to last even a single round. In the distance, the two of them were still locked in battle. Yi Xian looked at the man with golden light in front of Jian Zizai, and at the same time, the man with golden light looked at him as well. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, "Sister, you hold him back." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards the nearby experts from the temple. "I'll deal with those Ascension Realm experts from the temple first." The expressions of the experts from the temple changed drastically when they saw Yi Xian charge over. Currently, only two people in the entire temple could suppress Yi Xian. One was the white-haired woman, and the other was the man with golden light. But at this moment, both of them were being held back. Who could suppress Yi Xian now? Right at this moment, the white-haired woman spoke abruptly, "Retreat." The experts from the temple immediately turned around and fled when they heard the white-haired woman's words. The experts from the northern region were instantly helpless when they saw this. If they didn't fight a Ascension Realm expert like this, then they wouldn't be able to make him stay at all. Yi Xian's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. He turned around and looked into the distance. The white-haired woman and the one-legged man were still locked in battle, and they were in confrontation with the man with golden light. Neither of them attacked because they knew that it was pointless to do so. They couldn't kill each other. Yi Xian suddenly walked towards the hall. The man with golden light's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw this. "Mortal, how dare you act rashly?" Yi Xian didn't even pay attention to him, and he just walked straight into the hall. Killing intent seemed material in the man's eyes. After he walked into the hall, Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings. The hall was very spacious, and there were 6 statues before him. There were 2 women and 4 men, and they just looked down at him and emanated an invisible pressure. The pressure was very strong, and it was strong to the point that Yi Xian couldn't take another step forward after he walked in. He couldn't move. Besides that, he felt like he couldn't breathe at this moment. The pressure seemed like it wanted to crush him into pieces. Moreover, he felt terror that came from the depths of his soul. Kneel. At this moment, he actually wanted to kneel and submit before these gods. Divine might? Yi Xian's expression gradually became ferocious as he gazed at the 6 statues. Gods. High and mighty gods. They actually wanted him to kneel. Yi Xian's expression became more and more ferocious, and at this moment, his blood suddenly boiled. Boom! At this moment, a blood-red light suddenly swept out from his body, and in an instant, the divine might was directly dispersed by this blood-red light. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the 6 statues. His eyes were blood-red like a sea of blood. At this moment, one of the male statues suddenly opened his eyes, and a monstrous pressure swept down. This pressure directly shattered Yi Xian's blood-red light. At the same time, Yi Xian himself was directly sent flying out of the hall. At this moment, everyone outside the hall stopped. This was because an invisible pressure was stirring up the surroundings. At this moment, all the cultivators of the northern region felt as if there were 1,000 mountains pressing down on them, making it difficult for them to breathe. Not far away, Jian Zizai's eyes were also filled with seriousness as she looked into the hall. Could it be that the god was about to appear? On the other side, the one-legged man had also stopped at this moment, and there was a trace of doubt in his eyes as he looked in the direction of the hall. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from within the hall, "Ignorant mortal, how dare you blaspheme the divine might? You must die." As the voice faded away, the statue in front of the hall, riding a Pegasus and holding a giant axe, suddenly opened its eyes. The next moment, it looked down at Yi Xian, and a strong wave of pressure crushed towards Yi Xian. Boom! At this moment, the surrounding space boiled at this moment. At this moment, the man with the giant axe suddenly leaped up, and in the air, he fiercely chopped at Yi Xian with the axe in his hand. With this chop, the surrounding space instantly collapsed, and everyone was directly placed into a spatial black hole. On the other side, when the man with the giant axe attacked Yi Xian, Jian Zizai's expression instantly changed drastically. This attack wasn't something that Yi Xian could withstand at this moment. She was about to act, but the man with golden light in front of her slapped his palm towards her. The one-legged man couldn't act either because the white-haired woman in front of him was tightly entangled with him as well. Yi Xian raised his head and looked at the descending giant axe with a calm expression. He knew that this time, he could only rely on himself. He couldn't rely on anyone. When the giant axe was still a few dozen meters away from his head, he sensed the aura of death. This time, he felt that death was so close to him. Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes, and he suddenly muttered something. In next to no time, an illusory Shao Ta appeared between his brows. The prison pagoda. This time, he wasn't going to activate the prison pagoda. Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes, and they seemed to be on the verge of splitting apart as he roared furiously, "Cage the heavens!" As soon as his voice fell, the surrounding space trembled violently. In the next moment, the scene suddenly became quiet. At this moment, time seemed to stand still. The giant axe above Yi Xian's head stopped at this moment. In the surroundings, the space began to change layer by layer. No, it was reforming. All the space in the surroundings was actually reforming. At this moment, in front of the temple, all the Tao laws and the power of laws in the four-dimensional universe were directly erased. New Tao laws and laws appeared in the field. Soon, the space around the man with the giant axe in front of Yi Xian turned into a strange transparent space cage. The space cage locked the man with the giant axe tightly. At this moment, the surroundings returned to normal. The only abnormal thing was the man with the giant axe. The space where he was now began to disintegrate bit by bit. The man with the giant axe struggled frantically. He wanted to escape, but no matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't escape from the cage. At this moment, the space outside the temple suddenly trembled. Soon, a mysterious force began to madly gather towards the temple. Lian Qian's voice suddenly rang out, "You used Master's 6 paths of truth to erase the Tao laws and laws of the Tendo here. The four-dimensional Tendo is going to attack you. P.S. It's good that the updates are a little early recently. In any case, they will be updated before 8 a.m. The latest update is 8 a.m., unless there is a special reason. I might not be the most updated, but I'm definitely the most stable and punctual." Chapter 751. Four-dimensional Tendo. At this moment, Yi Xian had no time to care about this Tendo. After using the 6 paths of truth just now, his entire body seemed to have been drained. Weakness. Weakness from the depths of his soul. He had never been so weak before. At this moment, the man with the long axe not far away had completely disappeared. He had been directly erased. He had been erased by a power that did not belong to this universe. The expressions of the white-haired woman and the others immediately became unsightly when they saw this. He had been killed in an instant. Such a powerful oracle had been killed by Yi Xian in an instant. Was he a devil? The white-haired woman looked at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, she suddenly realized that she had never seen through this young man in front of her. There was a trace of seriousness in the eyes of the man with golden light. The strength of the oracle just now was slightly higher than his and the white-haired woman's, but he had been easily killed by Yi Xian. This was terrifying. Back then, the gods had defeated the humans, but this did not mean that there were no powerhouses and monstrous geniuses in the human race. Some monstrous geniuses and powerhouses were even feared by the gods. At this moment, Lian Qian suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She glanced at the white-haired woman and the others, then looked at Yi Xian. "Let's go first." Yi Xian nodded. In his current state, he could no longer fight. What he needed now was to heal his injuries. Yi Xian and the others were about to retreat, but at this moment, the white-haired woman suddenly said, "You want to leave?" As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her right hand, and a wave of lightning directly shook towards the northern powerhouses. How could she not see that Yi Xian was currently in a weakened state? If she let Yi Xian go now, it would be even more difficult to kill him when he recovered in the future. Moreover, there were already powerhouses rushing here. What she needed to do now was to delay Yi Xian. Seeing the white-haired woman directly attack, Lian Qian frowned slightly. She suddenly looked at the one-legged man not far away. "You delay that woman." The one-legged man nodded and directly rushed towards the white-haired woman. Jian Zizai appeared in front of the man. Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian. "Activate the spatial Tao laws and bring everyone out of here immediately." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "I can't." He was so weak that he couldn't even kill a chicken. Lian Qian didn't speak. She just gestured with her right hand, and then the spatial Tao law appeared in her palm. In the next moment, the space in the surroundings started to tremble violently, and it didn't take long for the space here to become illusory. At this moment, the white-haired woman in the distance suddenly roared, "Stop them!" As soon as the white-haired woman's voice fell, the deity's Templars experts who had retreated earlier appeared once more. At the same time, numerous arrays suddenly appeared in the surroundings. Lian Qian's expression became extremely unsightly when she witnessed this scene, and she suddenly said, "Yanjia." With that, Yanjia suddenly appeared in front of Lian Qian and Yi Xian. Lian Qian looked at Yanjia, and the latter nodded slightly. She turned around and made her way towards the experts nearby. Flames suddenly swept out from her body. Boom! The space around Yanjia seethed. She suddenly pressed her palms together, and then her eyes opened wide with rage. Go! In an instant, countless fire dragons that were condensed from lava suddenly flew out from within her, and then they smashed forcefully towards the experts of the deity's Templar. Everywhere they passed, space was instantly set ablaze, and it was an extremely shocking scene. The expressions of the experts of the deity's Templar instantly changed when they witnessed this scene. Yi Xian was shocked as well. She's actually so strong. A few experts of the deity's Templar charged towards Yanjia, while the others forcefully held back the experts of the north. They couldn't allow Yi Xian and the others to leave. Lian Qian's expression was quite unsightly. She could take Yi Xian and leave right now, but what would happen to the other experts of the north if they left? Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Since they don't want us to leave, then we won't." Lian Qian gazed at Yi Xian, and Yi Xian grinned, "Kill." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand, and then a black shadow shot explosively towards the experts of the deity's Templar. An emperor's corpse. After the emperor's corpse joined the battle, the situation was completely one-sided. The emperor's corpse was an unknown realm expert, and the deity's Templar didn't have many experts of such level. If it wasn't for the formations of the deity's Templar, then these experts would have been slaughtered on the spot. Yi Xian gazed at Lian Qian. "I'll leave those formations to you." Lian Qian nodded slightly, and then she vanished on the spot. Yi Xian sat down cross-legged once Lian Qian vanished. Healing. Since I can't leave, then I won't. Yi Xian started to absorb the energy crystals, healing pills, and spirit fruits like a madman. It didn't take long for his body to recover slowly. On the other side, the white-haired woman suddenly stopped fighting the one-legged man. She glanced at Yi Xian, and then she gazed at the one-legged man. "I don't think you're very familiar with him. You're not one of his people." The one-legged man nodded slightly, "Not really." The white-haired woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then do you know of my deity's Templar?" The one-legged man nodded. "I've heard of it." The white-haired woman spoke coldly. "Since you've heard of it, then why are you helping him deal with my deity's Templar?" The one-legged man spoke softly. "I'm taking him somewhere." The white-haired woman asked, "Where?" The one-legged man fell silent. The white-haired woman spoke in a low voice. "You should know the strength of my deity's Templar. Is it really worth it to become enemies with my deity's Templar for him?" The one-legged man fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "Have you seen a woman in a plain dress?" The white-haired woman frowned slightly. "Her." The one-legged man nodded and asked, "Have you?" The white-haired woman shook her head. "No." The one-legged man spoke softly. "I think, she's even more terrifying." As soon as he finished speaking, he'd vanished. Hiss. A tearing sound suddenly resounded. The white-haired woman's expression instantly became ferocious when she saw the one-legged man attack, and then she transformed into a bolt of lightning that vanished on the spot. Rumble. Numerous voices resounded incessantly in the surroundings. On the other side, Jian Zizai and the man with golden light didn't attack. Jian Zizai glanced at the hall and saw the 6 statues. Obviously, these 6 statues were the gods worshipped by the deity's Templar. 6 gods? Jian Zizai wasn't afraid of gods. On the contrary, she wanted to see the legendary gods. In the 4-dimensional universe, the so-called gods were too mysterious. Of course, in her heart, only the woman in the plain dress was qualified to be called a god. That woman's strength was unknown. The man with golden light's gaze was fixed on Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian's injuries had recovered by 20% to 30%. The man with golden light still had a solemn expression. The scene of Yi Xian killing the divine emissary lingered in his mind. That was a divine emissary, yet he was instantly killed by Yi Xian. In other words, Yi Xian also had the ability to kill him in an instant. The man with golden light withdrew his thoughts and looked up at the sky with a trace of doubt in his eyes. How much longer would it take? Jian Zizai glanced at the man with golden light, then looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, Jian Zizai's voice sounded in Yi Xian's mind. That God might come. God. Yi Xian opened his eyes and looked into the distance. Now, the northern region and the temple had formed a stalemate. The northern region had a slight advantage, but if an expert from the temple came, or if that God came, at that time, the situation would be reversed in an instant. The temple could afford to delay, but he couldn't. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian suddenly stood up and looked at the man with golden light. When he saw Yi Xian look over, the man with golden light immediately became alert. He didn't dare to be careless against Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked at the man with golden light. His expression gradually became ferocious. Soon, an illusory Xiao Ta suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. Prison Pagoda. When he saw this Xiao Ta, the man with golden light's expression changed greatly. He retreated hundreds of feet. Yi Xian stared at the man with golden light. The prison pagoda between his eyebrows began to tremble violently. Soon, the prison pagoda flew into the sky. In an instant, a powerful pressure enveloped the surroundings. At this moment, everyone present looked at the prison pagoda. The prison pagoda. This was a supreme treasure of the fifth dimension. The man with golden light looked at Yi Xian. He slowly clenched his right hand and a powerful force gathered in his palm. Yi Xian's eyes were slightly closed. His entire body was trembling violently. It was as if he was holding back a powerful move. In the distance, the man with golden light's expression was extremely gloomy. He clenched his fists and golden light constantly vibrated around him. At this moment, his nerves were as taut as a bowstring. One could even say that he was a bit nervous. It was the scene of Yi Xian instantly annihilating the divine emissary that had left a shadow in his heart. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. At the instant that Yi Xian opened his eyes, the man with golden light's expression instantly changed violently. He swiftly slapped his palms downwards, and then countless strands of golden light surged out from within him. After that, they formed numerous thick golden barriers around him. However, he was stunned. Because he noticed that there wasn't even the slightest movement. The man with golden light was stunned. In the next moment, he suddenly gazed at the white-haired woman who wasn't too far away from him. At this moment, there was a blood-red prisoner character above her head. At this moment, everyone here came to a sudden understanding. So, Yi Xian's true target wasn't the man with golden light, and it was the white-haired woman instead. The white-haired woman was slightly stunned as well. She hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually attack her. The white-haired woman quickly recovered from her shock, and she was about to attack. However, Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously. Collect! As soon as his voice resounded, the pagoda trembled violently, and then a ray of red light enveloped the white-haired woman. She wasn't even able to react before she was absorbed into the pagoda. Rumble. The space and the surroundings shook violently as the pagoda transformed into a ray of black light that entered the center of Yi Xian's forehead. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. It's gone. The minds of the experts from the Divine Hall had gone blank. Not too far away, Yi Xian's face was extremely pale. He gazed at the man with golden light, and there was extreme fear in the man's eyes. Yi Xian was just about to speak when the man with golden light suddenly raised his head, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. It's over. Everyone raised their heads and looked over. A god has arrived? Chapter 752. Everyone was looking up at the sky. Above them, clouds suddenly gathered. Then, a formless pressure came crashing down. Wherever the pressure passed, the space would distort. Divine might. The pressure seemed to intend to destroy all living beings, and it was extremely shocking. Down below, everyone's expressions changed when they felt the pressure. Even Jian Zizai and Zui had extremely solemn expressions at this moment. God? Everyone was looking up at the sky. Is the legendary god about to appear? Yi Xian looked up with a calm expression. God? Actually, he was very curious about what kind of existence the so-called god was. All along, gods had only existed in legends, but now, he might be able to see one. As for the outcome, he didn't think too much about it. Because he'd done his best. Many things might not necessarily have a perfect outcome, but as long as he'd done his best and had a clear conscience, it was enough. Of course, he'd prepared for the worst. If I die, all of you won't have an easy time. At this moment, Jian Zizai suddenly said, "He's not here yet." Not here yet? Everyone in the surroundings was stunned. In next to no time, the expressions of the experts from the northern region became extremely unsightly. He hasn't arrived yet, but the pressure is already so strong. If he's here in person. Meanwhile, Yi Xian suddenly said, "The rest of the experts from the northern region, leave." The Divine Hall was unable to stop these experts from the northern region because there weren't many of them left. It wasn't that these experts from the northern region were useless, but the man with golden light and the god that was about to appear weren't existences that these experts from the northern region could resist. Meanwhile, the patriarch of the Xianyuan clan suddenly laughed bitterly, "Young friend Yi, why are we leaving? If you lose, will our clans have a good ending?" The patriarch of the Wu clan nodded slightly, "We're on the same boat now. If you die, we die as well. So, no matter what, let's face it together." Face it together. At this moment, they hadn't thought of abandoning Yi Xian because it was impossible. Their status in the hearts of the Divine Hall was too low. Yi Xian fell silent for a moment, and then he said softly, "Since it's like that, then let's see how formidable this god of legend is." Everyone nodded. At this moment, they had already accepted it, because they would have to face it in the end. Yi Xian looked at Zui who was not far away. "Senior, you are?" He was very curious about Zui. This Zui who suddenly appeared was not only powerful, but he was also helping him. Zui glanced at Yi Xian. "Zui." Yi Xian asked again, "Why did Senior help me?" This was what he was most curious about. Zui pondered for a moment and said, "I want to take you to save someone." Yi Xian asked, "Who?" Zui said, "I'm sorry, I can't reveal his background." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, you are so strong that you can't save him." Zui suddenly said, "You can." Yi Xian was puzzled. "Why?" Zui hesitated and said, "That plain-dressed woman asked me to find you. Only you can take out her sword chi." Plain-dressed woman. Yi Xian was stunned and then quickly said, "Senior, you have seen her?" Zui nodded. Yi Xian asked again, "Senior, did you fight with her?" Zui quickly shook his head, "I didn't fight. I couldn't beat her." Yi Xian, at this moment, the golden man not far away suddenly said, "You are too humble." Zui looked at the golden man and the latter said calmly, "An expert from my temple fought with her." Zui nodded, "I was there." The golden man said, "That expert from my temple sent us a sound transmission saying, 'Don't be careless.' In other words, she is very strong, but definitely not strong enough to make you fear her. Zui was stunned and then said, "He sent a sound transmission to you like this?" The golden man nodded. Zui frowned, "Does he have a grudge against your temple?" The golden man narrowed his eyes, "What do you mean?" Zui said in a deep voice, "If he didn't have a grudge against your temple, why would he harm you? It shouldn't be. Don't be careless." When Zui thought of the plain-dressed woman, he felt his heart tremble. The golden man stared at Zui, "How strong is she?" Zui shook his head, "I don't know." How strong was the plain-dressed woman? He didn't know at all. Because when the woman killed the expert from the temple, she only used one sword. When she killed the man in the coffin, she also used one sword. How could they judge her strength? They were all done with one sword. The golden man looked at Zui, "If you leave now, you can still make it." Zui hesitated and then looked at Yi Xian who was healing not far away, "He is coming with me." The golden man was expressionless, "Then you can be buried with him." As his voice fell, he looked up into the sky. At this moment, the pressure was getting stronger and stronger. Obviously, it was getting closer and closer. Zui looked up into the sky with a trace of worry in his eyes. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Senior, you should leave." Zui looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled and said, "This has nothing to do with Senior. I don't want to implicate Senior." Zui said in a deep voice, "Will you leave with me?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "I can't leave." "I can't leave either." If he left, the northern experts behind him would all die. Zui was silent for a moment and then said, "Let me help you. If I really can't beat her, then I will leave. Is that okay?" He didn't want to curry favor with the plain-dressed woman. It was just that between the temple and Yi Xian, he favored Yi Xian more. Therefore, he wanted to plant a cause. As for what the effect would be in the future, he didn't think too much about it. The great Tao of the world was really unpredictable. Especially the Tao of karma. Perhaps one inadvertent action could change one's life in the future. It was because he had planted the seed of evil that he had ended up like this. Hearing Zui's words, Yi Xian cupped his fists and said to Zui, "Thank you." He was naturally grateful for Zui's decision. After all, Zui didn't owe him anything, but he was willing to stay and help him. He would naturally remember this favor in his heart. However, whether he could return it or not would depend on whether he could survive today. Yi Xian opened his palm and the prison pagoda appeared in his hand. The prison pagoda trembled slightly as if it was expressing something. Yi Xian knew what the prison pagoda was expressing. The prison pagoda was telling him to run. Run? Unless he ran to the fifth dimension, it was meaningless. Yi Xian looked at Lian Qian. He handed the prison pagoda to her. "Miss Lian Qian, this is for you." Lian Qian looked at Yi Xian, "What do you mean?" Yi Xian smiled and said, "This pagoda's intelligence has not completely awakened. Right now, it is like a child and is the best time to control it. So, you, Yanjia, and you can truly control it now, right?" Lian Qian nodded. "You want to give me this pagoda so that I can take your sister and your friends away?" Yi Xian shook his head. He looked at the experts of the Xianyuan clan and said softly, "If I save my sister and my friends, what about those who fought alongside me?" As he spoke, he looked at Lian Qian. "What I mean is, I don't want to implicate you, Yanjia, the emperor dog, and Xiaoling, Lian Qian fell silent for a moment before shaking her head. "Everyone's goal is this pagoda. If you give it to me, even if I can hide from the divine hall, I won't be able to hide from some others." Just as Yi Xian was about to speak, the distant horizon suddenly started to tremble. Everyone raised their heads and looked up into the sky. The space there had suddenly split apart, and then a ray of golden light shot out. It didn't take long for a white-clothed man to walk out from within the golden light. The white-clothed man's appearance was no different from a human's. He wore white clothes, had slanted brows and starry eyes, and he seemed very refined and distinguished. He just walked out from within the golden light, and the space here suddenly became illusory when he appeared in the starry sky. A god? Everyone gazed at the white-clothed man. Is he a god? Right at this moment, Jian Zizai suddenly gazed at the white-clothed man. You're not a god. You're a human. The white-clothed man gazed at Jian Zizai and smiled. I'm a servant of God. A servant? Jian Zizai gazed at the white-clothed man. Why would you refuse to be a human and become a servant for someone else? The white-clothed man grinned. God can make me even stronger. Jian Zizai smiled. So you're kneeling? The white-clothed man replied softly, what's wrong with kneeling? Kneeling allows me to live, kneeling allows me to become stronger, and kneeling allows me to walk further on the path of the great path. As he spoke, he smiled. Moreover, there's no difference between kneeling and standing. Miss Jian, you're mistaken. Jian Zizai suddenly laughed, to be able to describe kneeling in such a refreshing and refined manner. I have to say, I admire you. Your skin is even thicker than that of Yi Xian below. No, he's far inferior to you. Yi Xian's face darkened. He had been shot while lying down. The white-clothed man looked at Jian Zizai. God said that if you're willing to be his servant, he'll let bygones be bygones and take you to the realm of ultimate bliss. Servant? Jian Zizai laughed out loud. Jian Zizai, don't have the habit of kneeling. The white-clothed man nodded slightly. He opened his palm, and a golden talisman flew out from his palm. Soon, the golden talisman exploded, and in an instant, a golden afterimage flew out from it. This golden afterimage flew directly towards Jian Zizai. The corners of Jian Zizai's mouth curled up slightly. She stomped her right foot and soared into the sky. The white-clothed man looked at Yi Xian below. You've blasphemed the might of God, and your sin is unforgivable. I've come to take your heads by God's order. As his voice fell, his right hand grabbed at Yi Xian's position. With this grab, a powerful force directly enveloped Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly waved his right hand, and 4 swords suddenly appeared in front of him. He roared, if you don't fuse now, I'll be finished. Fuse. As soon as he finished speaking, he urged his sword intent to fuse the 4 swords together. Boom! This time, the 4 swords did not resist. They directly fused into one sword. Buzz. The sound of a sword soared into the sky and resounded throughout the entire 4-dimensional universe. P.S. If you combine your monthly votes and recommendation votes, something unexpected will happen. Chapter 753. Yi Xian chose to fuse the swords right away. Because the white-clothed man's strength was absolutely not something that he could resist right now. He didn't want to fight until he was half dead before unleashing his ultimate attack. Fuse. That was one of his 2 greatest trump cards. According to his plan, if he couldn't fuse them, then he would use the immortal slaying sword Gourd. Fortunately, the 4 swords didn't fight each other this time. At the instant that the 4 swords fused into one, a sword howl shattered the white-clothed man's strength. In midair, the white-clothed man frowned slightly. What's that? A sword was floating in front of Yi Xian. The sword was around a meter long, and it was extremely ordinary. It was so ordinary that it seemed like an iron sword that could be found anywhere on the streets. Yi Xian was quite stunned when he laid eyes on the sword, and he almost thought that he'd fused it wrong. What did I fuse it into? Right at this moment, the sword trembled slightly, and then a woman floated out from within it. Yi Xian was slightly stunned when he saw the woman. Because the woman's appearance was slightly similar to the woman in the plain dress, but they weren't the same woman. Their bearings were completely different. But the woman before him gave off the feeling that she was the gentle type. The woman glanced at the surroundings with a dazed expression. Suddenly, she turned around to look at Yi Xian, and she was stunned when she saw Yi Xian. In the next moment, 2 streams of tears instantly flowed out of her eyes. Everyone was dumbfounded. What's going on? Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he asked. Senior? The woman suddenly walked over to Yi Xian, and then she stretched out her hand and placed it lightly on Yi Xian's face while tears continued to flow from her eyes. Yi Xian was speechless. The woman stroked Yi Xian's face lightly. It's you. It's really you. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, and then he asked, Senior, you are? The woman grinned, your family. Family? Yi Xian was stunned. My family? The woman was about to speak when the white-clothed man suddenly laughed. Family? Interesting. The woman looked at Yi Xian. He wants to kill you. Yi Xian nodded. The woman suddenly turned around, and in the next moment, she'd already appeared in front of the white-clothed man. The latter didn't even have the time to react before her hand had already grabbed his throat, and then a strand of sword intent instantly locked onto the white-clothed man's entire body. Everyone in the surroundings was stunned by this scene. Yi Xian was also petrified. This woman was so strong. In the air, the white-clothed man's mind was blank. The woman looked at the white-robed man. You killed him? The man in white stared at the woman. Who are you? You. At this moment, the woman's right hand suddenly twisted. Crack. The sound of bones breaking resounded abruptly, and then everyone watched as the woman twisted off the white-clothed man's head. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Everyone was petrified. Jian Zizai and the one-legged man had grave expressions on their faces. Especially the one-legged man. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Why are all the women I've encountered so strong? The woman tossed the head aside and directly appeared in front of Yi Xian. When she stood before Yi Xian, her expression suddenly softened. I didn't scare you, did I? Yi Xian. Everyone else. Everyone had strange expressions on their faces. Yi Xian was also not used to it. This woman, at this moment, the space at the end of the distant horizon suddenly split open, and a ray of golden light spread out. Everyone raised their heads and looked in the direction of the golden light. Another expert had arrived. The woman in front of Yi Xian turned around and glanced at the golden light. Her eyes were extremely calm, and there was not a single ripple in them. Yi Xian said in a low voice, that God might be coming. God? The corners of the woman's mouth curled up slightly. She looked at Yi Xian. Remember, there is no such thing as a God in this world. There are only more powerful people. Yi Xian frowned slightly. There is no God? The woman nodded. Many gods are just relatively powerful people. Because they are powerful enough, they call themselves gods or are treated as gods by others. Yi Xian looked at the woman. What about you? Are you a god? The woman smiled and said, do I look like a god to you? Yi Xian said in a low voice, can you tell me why you and the plain-dressed woman treat me so well? The plain-dressed woman? The woman looked at Yi Xian. Is she the owner of one of these 4 swords? Yi Xian nodded. The woman smiled and said, then it's normal. Yi Xian was a little confused. What's normal? The woman smiled slightly. Nothing. Yi Xian was confused. The woman suddenly opened her palm. At this moment, the World Prison Pagoda suddenly appeared in her hand. Looking at the World Prison Pagoda, her eyes flashed with surprise. This pagoda, Yi Xian asked, you know it? The woman shook her head. I have never seen it before. This pagoda shouldn't be from this universe. Yi Xian nodded. It's from the 5th dimension. The 5th dimension. The woman looked at Yi Xian. The 5th dimension? Yi Xian nodded. Yes. The woman was silent. Yi Xian looked at the woman. What's wrong? The woman looked around with a trace of confusion in her eyes. This is no longer the world I am familiar with. Saying this, she seemed to have thought of something and shook her head with a smile. I don't owe anyone anything. Saying this, she looked at Yi Xian. You have great karma on you. This karma is not only from the fourth dimension, but also from the fifth dimension. Saying this, her expression became somewhat cold. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment before asking, "Did you revive, or?" The woman collected her thoughts and smiled, "I no longer exist." "That's not right, I can only say that I'm living in another way." Yi Xian asked, "Then you will disappear later, right?" The woman smiled, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust." Yi Xian's expression dimmed. For some reason, he had a good impression of the woman in front of him, or rather, he felt very close to her. At this moment, the woman smiled and said, "Back then, after I reached my peak, I was unwilling to leave that world. However, my ability was too strong, and that world could not bear it. As such, I chose to split myself into 4. The woman in the plain dress you spoke of should be one of my clones." Yi Xian was stunned. The woman in the plain dress was a clone? Clone? Yi Xian was somewhat dumbfounded. Such a powerful person was actually a doppelganger? The woman continued, "However, the current her is even stronger than when I was at my peak." As she spoke, she turned her head and glanced at the horizon. With this glance, she could see countless star fields away. In that unknown star field, a woman in a plain dress suddenly stopped. After a moment of silence, she said softly, "You've sacrificed a lot. You should meet him." After saying this, she walked into the distance. Black-yellow great world, in front of the temple. The woman retracted her gaze and looked at Yi Xian, smiling. "Fortunately, she's here." Yi Xian said solemnly, "You can sense the 4 of them?" The woman nodded, "2 of them." Saying this, the smile on her face gradually disappeared. "What's wrong?" Yi Xian asked. The woman shook her head and did not speak. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Can you revive?" The woman smiled, "You want me to live?" Yi Xian nodded, "I don't know why, but I feel very close to you." Hearing this, the woman's smile widened, "I'm very happy. I really am." Ever since they had parted at the mountain crack that year, she had not smiled. Back then, she had not been willing to leave that world because he was there. She had protected that world for so many years not only because it was a small wish of hers, but also because she did not want anyone to destroy that world. Because he had once been in that world. The reason she had chosen to disappear forever as a clone was because he no longer existed in that world. Without him, even if she reached the peak of Sword Way, what was the point? After who knew how many years, she had lost the motivation to pursue Sword Way. The woman retracted her thoughts and once again looked at that unknown star field. She knew that the reason the woman in the plain dress was so strong was all because of an obsession. The woman in the plain dress had the motivation to pursue something. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Just how strong is she?" This she was naturally referring to the woman in the plain dress. The woman smiled, "Very strong." As she spoke, she looked around. In the end, her gaze fell on the World Prison Pagoda. There are 3 auras in this pagoda, and they are not particularly weak, not particularly weak. Yi Xian was stunned, but it didn't take long for him to understand what the woman was talking about. The 8th and 9th floors. But what about the last one? Of course, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that the woman had said that they were not particularly weak. What did she mean by that? His understanding was that the 8th and 9th floors were very weak in the eyes of the woman. At this moment, it was extremely silent. Everyone was looking at the woman and Yi Xian. This was naturally a great thing for the experts of the North. But it wasn't a good thing for the Divine Hall. At this moment, all the experts of the Divine Hall had extremely solemn expressions on their faces. The woman's strength was truly too terrifying. She was powerful to the point of instilling despair in their hearts. Suddenly, the sky trembled, and it didn't take long for an invisible pressure to sweep over. This pressure was completely different from before. At the instant this pressure appeared, the hearts of everyone in the surroundings trembled, and some actually knelt down on the spot. Even Yi Xian's body couldn't help but tremble. It was terror that came from the depths of his soul. At this moment, he actually couldn't control his fear. Jian Zizai and Azui had unprecedentedly solemn expressions on their faces as well. God! Without a doubt, it was definitely that so-called God who had come this time. Suddenly, the woman in front of Yi Xian waved her right hand. Hiss! A tearing sound resounded, and it didn't take long for the pressure to vanish without a trace. Meanwhile, a man walked out from the golden light above them. As soon as he stepped out, the entire world shook violently. The woman in front of Yi Xian suddenly stretched out her hand and grabbed the sword in front of Yi Xian. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Watch Qing Er's performance. As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and transformed into a ray of golden light that shot into the sky. In the sky, the man who had just stepped out frowned slightly. How dare you, mortal! At this moment, his pupils constricted. You! In the next moment, he suddenly smashed his fist down. That punch seemed like it could destroy the world. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the sword directly pierced through the fist. The pressure of the fist was simply overwhelming. In the blink of an eye, the woman had appeared in front of the man. A ray of light flashed as she grabbed the man's head with her left hand and lifted it up lightly. Hiss! Just like that, the man's head was lifted up into the air. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Everyone here was dumbstruck. The woman gazed at the head in her hand, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. A god? As she spoke, she gazed at Yi Xian. Qing Er can fight 100 people like him. Yi Xian was speechless. Chapter 754. She could fight 100 of them. Everyone was petrified. Was a god that weak? At that moment, that was the only thought in everyone's mind. Even Yi Xian was completely dumbfounded. He knew that the woman in front of him was very strong, but he didn't expect her to be this strong. Instant kill. That was an instant kill. A legendary god was killed in a second just like that? Moreover, the woman in front of him said that she could fight 100 of them. Compared to the experts of the northern region, the experts of the Pantheon were about to go crazy. Killed in an instant. The god they had always believed in was killed in an instant. What was wrong with this world? In the air, the woman turned to look at the spatial passage and smiled. Do you still want to come? This sentence was directed at the person on the other side of the space. In her eyes, there was no god. There was no response from the other side. The woman smiled. You should be glad because I want to accompany him. As her voice fell, she turned to Yi Xian. As if thinking of something, she suddenly turned to look at the experts of the Pantheon. Do you see the god you believe in? The experts of the Pantheon looked at the woman with fear. The woman smiled. Look, the god you believe in is nothing more than this. After saying that, she looked at Yi Xian. Walk with me. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then looked at the spatial passage in the air. At that moment, the spatial passage was slowly disappearing. Actually, she really wanted this woman to kill her way over and kill all those gods. As if she knew what Yi Xian was thinking, the woman smiled. First, I don't have much time left. I want to talk to you during this time. Secondly, you have to walk your own path in the end. Experts are not brought out by others, but by themselves. Yi Xian nodded slightly. I understand. The woman took Yi Xian's arm and said with a smile, let's go. As soon as she finished speaking, she and Yi Xian disappeared on the spot. In the field, everyone looked at each other. It ended just like that? This result exceeded everyone's expectations. Not far away, Jian Zizai was silent. He had to admit that everything that happened today was like a dream. God. The legendary god was killed as soon as he appeared. What was he playing at? Jian Zizai shook her head. She was about to leave when she seemed to think of something. She looked at Zui, who was not far away. You are? Ah, Zui said, I have no malice towards him. Jian Zizai nodded. She turned and disappeared. The experts from the northern region glanced at the members of the Divine Hall. They didn't attack, but they didn't leave either. However, the deity's Templar experts did not dare to move. In the starry sky, Yi Xian and the woman strolled into the distance. The woman's hand was still holding onto Yi Xian's arm, very naturally. Yi Xian discovered that the woman's body was becoming more and more illusory. The woman looked at the distant end of the starry sky and said with a smile, the affairs of the world are inconstant. I never thought that I would be able to see you again after so many years. Unfortunately. Yi Xian said solemnly, Senior, the woman suddenly said, just call me Qing-er. Qing-er. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, Qing-er. The woman stopped and looked at Yi Xian. She smiled and said, I'm very happy today. Yi Xian said solemnly, Qing-er, I was related to you in my previous life, right? The woman nodded. Yes. Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, you should understand that my previous life is my previous life, and this life is this life. I might not be the person from your previous life. The woman smiled and said, you are. Yi Xian was slightly puzzled. The woman smiled slightly. You're right. My previous life is my previous life, and this life is this life. However, you are different. As for what is different, I won't tell you now. It will be even more interesting when you find out for yourself in the future. Yi Xian smiled bitterly. All right. The woman smiled and looked at the distant end of the starry sky. The universe is very big. The road in the future will become more and more difficult. Yi Xian smiled and said, I know. The woman nodded. This time, I helped you. However, in this life, there won't always be someone to help you. Even if it's her, at this point, her brows suddenly furrowed. Yi Xian asked, what is it? The woman said softly, it's nothing. You must understand that you need to become stronger. Only by becoming stronger can you control your own fate. Saying this, she looked at the depths of the starry sky again. At the end of the starry sky, there are some not weak auras. And at the end of the end, there are some unknown auras. Among these people, some might become your enemies in the future, and some are already your enemies. Yi Xian nodded. I know. He was very clear that with the existence of the World Prison Pagoda, his troubles would never lessen. However, if the people from the fourth dimension wanted to mess with him, the people from the fifth dimension also wanted to mess with him, the pressure was still very great. The woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled slightly. Actually, a person needs to go through some hardships in life. If you don't go through hardships, how can you become stronger? Saying this, she walked into the distance. After walking 2 steps, she suddenly thought of something and returned to Yi Xian's side. She hugged Yi Xian's arms with both hands and smiled. Let's go together. At this moment, Yi Xian had a strange feeling. At this moment, he felt very close, very natural, as if Yi Ling was hugging his arms. Why did he have this kind of feeling towards the woman in front of him? Yi Xian couldn't understand, but he didn't want to think too much about it. Just like that, the two of them walked into the distance. At this time, Qing-er suddenly looked around. The universe here is actually about to dry up. Dry up? Yi Xian frowned slightly. How can that be? I feel that the spiritual energy here is very abundant. Qing smiled. Have you heard of rearing pigs? Rearing pigs? Yi Xian asked. What do you mean? Qing smiled faintly. In this world, self-interest is paramount. The various kinds of spiritual energy in the universe are non-renewable. If humans and other living beings want to cultivate and become stronger, they need spiritual energy. To put it simply, the big fish eats the small fish, and the small fish eats the shrimp. The gods in your world are these big fish, and your universe is their pig farm. Because this universe has been sealed by a mysterious power, your achievements here, no matter how monstrous your talents are. Yi Xian asked in a low voice, then why don't they just get rid of these living beings and enjoy the universe for themselves? Qing smiled. If we don't rear pigs, how can we have pork to eat? Yi Xian shook his head. I still don't understand. Qing explained with a smile, these so-called gods have a special cultivation method. They need the power of faith. However, they don't need the power of faith from the masses. What they need is the power of faith from the strongest experts in this world. You see, the Pantheon's powerhouses are stronger than your friends. Why? Because only by believing in them will they give these people some special resources to make them stronger. Hearing this, Yi Xian somewhat understood. The power of faith? The Pantheon's gods need the power of faith. If the world's top powerhouses want to become stronger, they must worship them. Only by worshipping them can they become stronger. Isn't this the same as rearing pigs? As if thinking of something, Yi Xian asked again. Qing you just said our world's spiritual energy is drying up. Qing nodded. Your world seems to be full of spiritual energy, but it's rotten to the core. Because there's almost no primordial qi left in this world. Moreover, the source of ordinary spiritual energy is on the side of those so-called gods. By controlling primordial qi, you can control the number of the universe's top powerhouses. By controlling ordinary spiritual energy, you can control the quality of your world's cultivators. Yi Xian was silent. He really didn't expect it to be so complicated. At this time, Qing smiled and said, "Let me help you." As her voice fell, she turned around and waved her right hand. A sword light soared into the sky. Buzz! A sword's cry resounded throughout the four-dimensional universe. Soon, there was a shattering sound in the distant starry sky. Following this shattering sound, Yi Xian suddenly discovered that the surrounding spiritual energy was madly increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. At this moment, everywhere in the four-dimensional universe, the spiritual energy was increasing at a crazy rate. Everyone was dumbfounded. At this time, in the distant starry sky, an illusory man suddenly appeared. He looked at Qing Qing looked at the man and smiled. Why are you so weak? Yi Xian, the man looked at Qing deeply. Finally, he looked at Yi Xian and disappeared. At this time, Yi Xian discovered that the woman's body was becoming more and more illusory. He knew that Qing was about to disappear. Yi Xian looked at the woman. Qing with your strength, you should be able to prevent yourself from disappearing, right? The woman smiled. You don't want me to disappear? Yi Xian nodded. The woman was silent. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment. Then, he said, it should be possible, right? The woman smiled. I have seen you. I have no regrets. Yi Xian looked at Qing But I feel a little regretful. I don't know why I have this feeling. The woman was silent. Yi Xian said again. Qing you must have a way to not disappear, right? At this time, the woman's body was becoming more and more illusory. The woman looked at Yi Xian and smiled. Some things can't be changed. As her voice fell, her body became completely illusory. Yi Xian said with a trembling voice. No, there must be a way, right? The woman smiled. Actually, I also want to live. Back then, I felt that living was meaningless. But now, I want to live and accompany you. It's a pity. As she spoke, she suddenly hugged Yi Xian. Tears flowed from her eyes again. I can't bear to leave you. I really can. I once felt that the human world was meaningless because you weren't in it. But now, I want to live. I want to laugh with you. I want to cry with you. I want to see all the beautiful things in the world with you. As she spoke, she looked at the starry sky in the distance. Then, she smiled. With you in the human world, everything is so beautiful. As soon as she finished speaking, she had already vanished. Yi Xian looked at the empty starry sky in front of him in a daze. She's gone. P.S. I don't dare to look at the book reviews recently. I'll come back when I have more chapters. Chapter 755. In the starry sky, Yi Xian stood quietly. Gone. The woman he met for the first time was gone. At this moment, Yi Xian felt his heart was empty. This feeling was very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Or rather, a little heartache. Towards this Qing, whom he had just met, he really had a special feeling. Family. This was how he felt about this Qinger. His previous life? Yi Xian looked up at the vast starry sky. What did he do in his previous life? The woman in the plain dress, Qinger, why were they so good to him? Previous life? This life? Yi Xian did not think too much about it, because Qinger said he would understand in the future. Yi Xian looked around, his eyes still somewhat blank. Qinger, at this moment, boom! A powerful aura suddenly erupted from the prison pagoda. Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, a sword floated out. Soul-suppressing sword. At this moment, the aura of soul-suppressing sword skyrocketed wildly. Yi Xian was stunned. This, boom! Within the soul-suppressing sword, another powerful aura erupted. This aura directly shook Yi Xian hundreds of feet away. Yi Xian looked at the soul-suppressing sword with a face full of shock. Previously when Little Soul said that she was going to break through, he did not think too much about it. But now he found that this Little Soul's breakthrough was a bit abnormal, and it came suddenly. What was going on? Just as Yi Xian's mind was full of questions, the soul-suppressing sword not far away suddenly trembled violently, and a sword cry came out from it. The surrounding starry sky directly boiled at this moment. Yi Xian was stunned. This soul-suppressing sword's aura was not weaker than the executing heaven sword. At this moment, Little Soul's voice suddenly sounded in Yi Xian's mind. Young lord. I broke through. Yi Xian quickly asked. Little Soul, what level are you now? Soul was silent for a moment, then said, I don't know. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Little Soul, how did you suddenly become so strong? Is it because you devoured that expert from the deity's hall? Yes, Little Soul said softly. Yi Xian frowned. That shouldn't be the case. The soul of an expert shouldn't be able to make you so strong. Soul's aura was too strong. It was so powerful that it did not lose to the executing heaven sword at all. This wasn't a notification, it was a sudden increase. Soul said softly, Young master, I can't tell you the real reason. In any case, it's a good thing, isn't it? Yi Xian was silent for a moment. Then he waved his right hand, and Little Soul appeared in his hand. At this moment, Little Soul's appearance had also changed. There was a wisp of sword light circling around Little Soul's blade. Sword light? Looking at that sword light, Yi Xian frowned slightly. It felt somewhat familiar. He was about to ask, but at this time, Jian Zizai suddenly appeared beside him. Jian Zizai glanced in front of Yi Xian. She left? Yi Xian nodded. Jian Zizai said softly, "What's your next plan?" Yi Xian looked into the depths of the starry sky. "Do you think those gods will let it go?" Jian Zizai smiled. "Probably not." Yi Xian nodded. "I think so too. Qing killed a god, but there was more than one god." At this time, Jian Zizai said, "However, they may not dare to easily attack you." Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "But if they attack again, it will definitely destroy the world." Jian Zizai nodded. "Not only do you have to face the experts of the fourth dimension, but you also have to be careful of the experts of the fifth dimension." The fifth dimension. Yi Xian's face darkened. Not only did he have to be careful of the fifth dimension, but he also had to be careful of the eighth and ninth floors of the tower. At present, the eighth floor was not an existence that was easy to get along with. After a moment, Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and said softly, "To the temple." With that, he turned and left with Jian Zizai. At the temple. At this time, the temple's powerhouses had not left. With that woman here, unless they fled to the fifth dimension, there was no use. That woman made them despair. Seeing Yi Xian return, the faces of the temple powerhouses suddenly changed. Right now, their life and death were all in the hands of the man in front of them. Yi Xian glanced at the powerhouses of the temple and said calmly, "Kill. Kill." Everyone was stunned. One by one, the powerhouses of the northern region looked at Yi Xian. At first, they thought that Yi Xian would subdue these powerhouses, but they did not expect that Yi Xian would directly order them to kill. Not only did the powerhouses of the northern region not expect this, but the powerhouses of the temple also did not expect this. They also thought that Yi Xian would make them submit. At this time, Yi Xian looked at the powerhouses of the northern region. "What are you waiting for?" The powerhouses of the northern region did not hesitate and directly rushed towards the powerhouses of the temple. At this time, the man glowing with golden light suddenly said, "Yi Xian. We are willing to submit to the northern region." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. "I don't trust you." Hearing this, the expression of the man glowing with golden light suddenly changed. He clenched his right hand tightly, as if he was going to fight to the death. But he knew that they had no chance of winning. Not to mention the woman from before, Jian Zizai and the one-legged man were now enough to sweep them away. Thinking of this, the man glowing with golden light sighed softly. "We are waiting for you to hand over a part of our soul and a part of our physical body." Hearing this, Yi Xian gently waved his right hand, and the powerhouses of the northern region stopped. Yi Xian walked in front of the man glowing with golden light, and the latter glanced at the temple behind him with a complicated expression. They had abandoned them. The reason why he chose to surrender was because God had abandoned them, and he could not contact God at all. Even God was afraid of that woman. The man glowing with golden light withdrew his thoughts and opened his palm. A soul appeared in his hand, and he passed it to Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not refuse, and he directly put the soul away. Then, he looked at the other powerhouses of the temple nearby. Those powerhouses were slightly hesitant. Handing over their souls meant that they would forever be under Yi Xian's control. Their life and death depended on a single thought from Yi Xian. Suddenly, the man glowing with golden light said, "We have no choice." No choice. Hearing this, the powerhouses of the pantheon were shocked. Hearing the man with golden light's words, they suddenly realized that they had no other choice. If they didn't hand over their souls, they would die. Thinking of this, some of the powerhouses started to hand over a part of their soul and a part of their physical body. It didn't take long for all the powerhouses to hand over a part of their soul and a part of their physical body. It could be said that all the powerhouses of the pantheon were under Yi Xian's control. Yi Xian glanced behind him. Meanwhile, a woman walked over. It was Shengguan Xian. Yi Xian said, "Gather all the wealth of the Pantheon Divine Hall and distribute it to everyone." Delight instantly appeared on the faces of the northern region's experts when they heard this. The Pantheon Divine Hall could be said to be the wealthiest power in fantasy world, so how shocking was its wealth? Just a single share was a huge fortune. Moreover, the Pantheon Divine Hall once possessed a huge amount of territory. From this moment onward, all of that territory would be ownerless. The experts of the various powers couldn't help but start laughing when they thought about the boundless territory and wealth they possessed. If they lost this battle, then they would lose everything. However, they'd won. So they'd become rich overnight. All of them gazed at Yi Xian, and then they bowed slightly. "Thank you, King Yi." Yi Xian could have chosen to take everything for himself, but Yi Xian hadn't done that. Yi Xian glanced at the experts of the northern region. "All of you sacrificed a great deal in this battle, and all of you deserve it. Moreover, I hope that we can be even more united in the future to seek a better future together." The Xianyuan family patriarch hurriedly said, Of course. We should join forces and seek a better future together." The others hurriedly chimed in as well. Yi Xian's leg was extraordinarily thick now, so they had to hug it tightly. Yi Xian nodded, and then he turned around and walked towards the Pantheon Divine Hall in the distance. The man with golden light hesitated for a moment before he hurriedly followed. Jian Zizai and the one-legged man followed as well. All of them arrived at the Pantheon Divine Hall. At this moment, only 5 statues remained in the hall. One of the statues had vanished. Yi Xian said softly, "Which god was the one that died just now?" The man with golden light shook his head, "I don't know." Yi Xian looked at the man with golden light. "What's your name?" The man with golden light said in a low voice, "Lin Hai, the divine emissary here." Yi Xian nodded. "You don't know which god he was?" Lin Hai nodded slightly, "I don't." Yi Xian was a little curious, "Why don't you know?" Lin Hai said in a low voice, "Before this, Xiao Tian, and I have never seen a god. We have only communicated through voice transmission. No, they only contact us occasionally." Yi Xian looked at Lin Hai. "Xiao Tian, Who?" Lin Hai said, "The white-haired woman that was taken away by your pagoda." "Xiao Tian, Yi Xian nodded. He kind of admired this woman a little. This woman was different from the other Pantheon experts. If she had appeared earlier, he was afraid that he would have been fine. Yi Xian withdrew his thoughts and looked at the 5 statues in front of him. There were 2 women and 3 men. Yi Xian asked again, "These so-called gods, where are they?" Lin Hai shook his head, "I don't know." Yi Xian looked at Lin Hai, who smiled bitterly, "I really don't know. They have contacted us very few times, and they have never appeared in this starfield. They will only contact us when someone has reached the unknown realm." Yi Xian asked, "Why?" Lin Hai said in a low voice, "As long as someone has reached the unknown realm, they will ask us to contact them and make them submit. If they are willing, they will bestow a gift and help them reach the true unknown realm." Yi Xian frowned slightly. "The true unknown realm?" Lin Hai nodded. The unknown realm native to Black-Yellow Great World is actually not the true unknown realm. Only the special spirit qi bestowed by the gods can help them reach the true unknown realm. And if they are not willing to worship them? Yi Xian asked, "What will happen?" Lin Hai said in a low voice, "They will die." Yi Xian glanced at the 5 statues. As Qing said, these gods were rearing pigs. Gods? That's what they look like. Yi Xian shook his head slightly. Just as he was about to leave, the statue of a god in front of him suddenly opened its eyes. Chapter 756. Lin Hai's expression instantly changed drastically when he witnessed this scene, and he instinctively took a few steps back. The expressions of the one-legged man and Jian Zizai turned solemn. Although a god had just been killed in an instant, this did not mean that these self-proclaimed gods were weak. It should be said that they were only weak in front of that woman. In front of others, they were still gods. Yi Xian turned to look at the god, who was also looking at him. Yi Xian smiled. Why? The god stared at Yi Xian. Remember, I am the origami. As the voice faded, the statue suddenly became illusory and then turned into nothingness. Origami. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then he led everyone away. The northern region. At this moment, almost all the experts of the Black-Yellow Great World had gathered in the Northern Region Palace. In the Northern Region, there were only two people in the Unknown Realm, Jian Zizai and the One-Legged Man. No, Jian Zizai wasn't in the Unknown Realm yet, but she was no weaker than an Unknown Realm expert. Half-step Unknown Realm cultivators were rare as well. They were the current leader of the Xianyuan clan, the leader of the Wu clan, and a mysterious elder from the Bound of Universe. This elderly man was called over by the Xianhuang master. He should be the strongest person in the entire Xianhuang world right now. There weren't many other Ascended Foam Realm experts either. There were only 39 of them in the Northern Region and the Bound of Universe. Almost half of them were from the Bound of Universe. This time around, everyone was equally astounded by the strength of the Xianhuang world. Because they had never imagined that the Bound of Universe, which had been silent for so many years, would actually be so powerful. Patience. All these years, the Xianhuang realm had been enduring silently. Of course, they had no choice but to endure. Because if the Bound of Universe had revealed its strength before this, it would definitely have been targeted by all the other forces. After all, after the Bound of Universe had declined, most of its territory had been divided by a few major forces. Other than the Northern Region and the Bound of Universe, there was now another temple. There was one unknown expert on the temple side, and that was Lin Hai. There were also 7 half-step unknown experts and 13 ascended mystic realm experts. It could be said that the Temple of Gods was the strongest among all the factions. Everyone in the hall was silent. Yi Xian sat at the head of the table, and not far from him was the mysterious Yellow Lord. Now, the battle was over, but there was a problem. How should the Xianhuang Great World be divided again? Moreover, was it an alliance now, or was it directly submitting to Yi Xian? Needless to say, the Temple of Gods must have knelt down. His divine soul was in Yi Xian's hands. However, if they were asked to submit to Yi Xian, they would definitely be unwilling. After all, once they submitted, their clans would become someone else's subordinates. No one wanted that. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Everyone, I won't play those tricks with all of you. I have an idea, why don't we form an alliance? We'll call it the North. We'll be allies, attacking and defending. What do you think? Alliance." Everyone looked at each other, but no one said anything. At this moment, the mysterious Yellow Lord said with a smile, "Young Master Yi, get to the point. Otherwise, we won't dare to express our opinions." Yi Xian nodded. To put it simply, everyone is still everyone. You're not my subordinates. Everyone will do their own thing. However, if something happens, then we'll be a whole, and everyone must be united. As he spoke, he looked at everyone and said, "The North Alliance will appoint 7 elders. These 7 elders have the power to dismiss the alliance leader. Not only that, anything that the North Alliance wants to do will need the approval of the 7 elders. What do you think?" Hearing this, everyone began to discuss. The mysterious Yellow Lord glanced at Yi Xian and did not say anything. At this moment, the Xianyuan clan leader suddenly said, "That's fine, but if one day, someone wants to withdraw," Yi Xian said with a smile, "it's up to everyone. If anyone wants to withdraw, we won't stop them, nor will we harm them." The Xianyuan clan leader nodded slightly. "That's fine." Right now, the Bound of Universe still had enemies, and that was those gods. In fact, they wanted to form an alliance more than Yi Xian. Because now, only the people behind Yi Xian could fight against those gods. Without Yi Xian, once those gods came, who could fight against them? Yi Xian nodded. "Then it's decided. If there's anything, you can discuss it with Xian, and Little Jiu. I'm usually busy, so the two of them will help me deal with everything." After saying this, she stood up and left. The Master of Black-Yellow glanced at Yi Xian and then followed him. In the hall, everyone began to discuss. In a garden, Yi Xian and the mysterious Yellow Lord walked slowly. The mysterious Yellow Lord did not speak. Yi Xian said softly, "I know what you're thinking." The mysterious Yellow Lord looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "What are you thinking?" Yi Xian said softly, "You're very ambitious." The mysterious Yellow Lord chuckled. "Having ambition isn't necessarily a bad thing, is it?" Yi Xian nodded. "It's not a bad thing. I can tell you that I don't have much interest in power. I won't choose to be the next alliance leader." The mysterious Yellow Lord looked at Yi Xian. "Little Seven." Yi Xian smiled. "I don't know her." Little Seven cared a little about power, or rather, she wanted to make God Nation stronger. Therefore, he could not guarantee that Little Seven would not want to be the alliance leader. After all, this alliance leader could be said to be the most powerful person in the Black-Yellow Great World. The mysterious Yellow Lord stared at Yi Xian. Yi Xian smiled. "I still don't know your name." The mysterious Yellow Lord retracted his gaze. "Li Qingxue." "Li Qingxue." Yi Xian nodded. "Very nice." After saying this, he walked into the distance. Li Qingxue followed. On the way, Yi Xian said softly, "Miss Li, do you think it's meaningful to be the alliance leader of the Black-Yellow Great World?" Li Qingxue looked at Yi Xian. "What do you mean?" Yi Xian looked up at the sky and said softly, "Even if you become the alliance leader of the Black-Yellow Great World, in the eyes of some experts, you're still like an ant, right?" Li Qingxue was silent. Yi Xian said again, "Your pursuit is not wrong, and I don't want to change anything about you. You can fight for the next alliance leader position with your own strength. I won't help Little Seven. Everyone can choose whoever they want. As for me, I definitely won't be the alliance leader. You can rest assured about that." Li Qingxue was silent for a moment. "Do you know that the alliance leader position is equivalent to being able to dominate the entire Black-Yellow Great World?" Yi Xian smiled and did not say anything. He continued walking into the distance. Li Qingxue was silent. At this moment, she understood what Yi Xian meant. Even if Yi Xian was not the alliance leader, who in the Black-Yellow Great World would dare to touch him? Not to mention the people behind him, Yi Xian himself was extremely terrifying. After all, the oracle of the temple, Xiao Tian, had been subdued by Yi Xian. Strength. When one's strength reached a certain level, one could ignore everything. Li Qingxue was silent for a moment, then she turned and left. Yi Xian returned to his hall and entered the prison pagoda. There was a woman on the first floor. She was the white-haired woman, Xiao Tian. At this moment, Xiao Tian was locked by the prisoner character above her head. Yi Xian did not use the prison pagoda to kill her directly. Seeing Yi Xian walk over, Xiao Tian was expressionless. "What's wrong?" Yi Xian smiled. "Miss Xiao, you should already know what happened outside." Xiao Tian said softly, you win. Yi Xian looked at Xiao Tian. Miss Xiao, what are your plans now? Plan? Xiao Tian's beautiful eyes flashed with a trace of confusion. Plan? After God's head was cut off by that woman, her faith collapsed. Just as that woman had said, God was actually this weak. Thinking of this, Xiao Tian shook her head and smiled. Kill me if you want. Yi Xian sat in front of Xiao Tian. Miss Xiao, you are a smart person. Why are you so muddle-headed now? Xiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. Why? Yi Xian said softly, don't you think this is just the beginning? Xiao Tian stared at Yi Xian and did not speak. Yi Xian smiled. When Qing left, he cut off the restrictions of this world. In other words, there will no longer be any restrictions on the experts of this world, especially top experts like you. There will be no shackles in the future. You should know what this means. Xiao Tian was silent. Yi Xian did not say anything else. The woman in front of him was a smart person. She would understand everything. Of course, it would depend on whether the other party wanted to live or not. He would not leave an enemy for himself. A moment later, Xiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. What are your conditions? Yi Xian smiled. It seemed that she wanted to live. Well, if they could live, who would want to die? Yi Xian looked at Xiao Tian. Miss Xiao, you should understand. Xiao Tian said, I don't want to be someone else's slave. Yi Xian walked to Xiao Tian. I don't want you to be my slave. I just want you to follow me for 3 years and help me. After 3 years, you can leave freely. I won't stop you. 3 years. Xiao Tian frowned. Yi Xian smiled. In my opinion, the God you believed in before was a slave. But now, I don't want you to submit to me. You're still you. Understand? He paused for a moment before he continued, you're a free person now. Xiao Tian fell silent for a moment before she said, all right. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and the prisoner character above Xiao Tian's head disappeared. Xiao Tian regained her freedom. After regaining her freedom, Xiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. Aren't you afraid that I'll go back on my word? Yi Xian smiled. You won't. Xiao Tian asked, why? Yi Xian looked at Xiao Tian. Because you disdain it. Xiao Tian remained silent. Pride. Just as Yi Xian had said, the strong had their pride, and she, Xiao Tian, had her own pride. People could die, but they wouldn't do something so shameful. Just as Yi Xian had said, disdain. Yi Xian smiled. Miss Xiao has regained her freedom. Xiao Tian looked around and said, this is the 5th-dimensional treasure? Yi Xian nodded. Xiao Tian looked at Yi Xian. Can I see it? Yi Xian smiled. Why not? But we have to go out. With that, he and Xiao Tian left the prison pagoda. Yi Xian waved his right hand, and the prison pagoda landed in front of Xiao Tian. Xiao Tian glanced at Yi Xian, and her eyes suddenly turned cold. P.S. It's autumn. Everyone, keep warm. Chapter 757. Seeing Xiao Tian's cold eyes, Yi Xian smiled and did not speak. Xiao Tian did not make a move. Seeing that Xiao Tian did not move, Yi Xian smiled. What? Xiao Tian shook her head. Yi Xian, don't test human nature, let alone a woman's. Otherwise, one day, you will suffer a crushing defeat. Then, she turned and left. Yi Xian was silent where he was. Human nature. Most of the time, human nature could not withstand testing. After a moment of silence, Yi Xian turned and left. Now, peace had returned to the black-yellow Great World, and all the major forces were developing rapidly. In particular, Yi Xian's northern region was like the sun at high noon. In the black-yellow Great World, Yi Xian was no longer a match. However, Yi Xian did not let his guard down. Because those gods had not truly disappeared. After experiencing so much, Yi Xian also understood one thing. That was, before he possessed absolute strength, he would not be able to live a peaceful life. Unless he gave up the prison pagoda. In fact, even if he gave up the prison pagoda, things might not be over. Where there were people, there would be conflict. If there was no conflict, the only way was to be strong, so strong that the enemy would not dare to go against him. There was still a long way to go. Yi Xian came to the top of a mountain. He came to the edge, where he could see half of Tianjiang city. At this moment, he thought of a woman. Qing Er. He could not get that woman out of his mind. Brother. At this moment, a voice sounded behind him. Yi Xian turned around. Behind him, a little girl was walking towards him. It was none other than Yi Ling. Seeing Yi Ling, Yi Xian smiled and reached out his hand. Yi Ling walked quickly to him and took his hand. Brother, what are you thinking about? Yi Xian said with a smile, I miss a girl. Yi Ling blinked. Is it the elder sister who killed that god with one strike? Yi Xian nodded. Yi Ling whispered, brother, she's amazing. Yi Xian laughed, if Ling cultivates properly, she will definitely be as powerful as her in the future. Yi Ling said seriously, I will work very hard. Yi Xian gently rubbed Yi Ling's head. Both of us have to work hard. Yi Ling grinned. Big brother, my immortal Dao sect now has more than 200 people. Over 200 people. Yi Xian laughed, amazing. Amazing. The immortal Dao sect could be said to be the most special force in the Xianhuang Great World. It was special because the sect master, Yi Ling, was Yi Xian's younger sister. And everyone knew that this Yi Xian was a demon who loved his sister. This was why many people wanted to join the immortal Dao sect. Resources. On the path of cultivation, the most important thing was resources. Obviously, following Yi Ling of the immortal Dao sect was very promising. At this moment, Yi Ling leaned on Yi Xian and whispered, Big brother, where did she go? Her. Yi Xian was slightly startled. Soon, he understood who Yi Ling was referring to. Dugu Xian. After Dugu Xian left, there was no news of her. Yi Xian had asked Shengguan Xiener to help investigate, but there was still no news. Yi Xian frowned slightly. He felt that Dugu Xian was not simple and was a bit mysterious. Yi Xian was silent for a moment and then said softly, when the time comes, I will ask Big Sister Xiener to help investigate again. Yi Ling nodded. Big brother, who is our father? Father. Yi Xian was stunned. He was also quite curious about his father because Dugu Xian had never mentioned it to him. Who was that man? After a moment, Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Let's not think about this. Anyway, wherever you are, it is home to me. Yi Ling smiled sweetly and then leaned her head on Yi Xian's body. At this moment, a woman came behind Yi Xian. Jian Zizai. Yi Xian turned to look at Jian Zizai. Jian Zizai whispered, I'm leaving. Leaving? Yi Xian was stunned and then asked, where are you going? Jian Zizai smiled and said, to do some things. Yi Xian was silent. Jian Zizai said softly, for a while, those gods should not make any big moves. You need to take advantage of this time to improve yourself, understand? Yi Xian nodded. I know. Jian Zizai gently patted Yi Xian's shoulder and said with a smile, see you in the future." After saying that, she turned around and disappeared into the distant horizon. She left. She left without the slightest hesitation. Jian Zizai. Life was free. Yi Xian looked at the sky and smiled slightly. "Sister, see you in the future." At this time, Shangguan Xian came to Yi Xian. "The Taoists are here." Taoists? Yi Xian frowned slightly. In the previous battle with the Divine Hall, the Taoists had not taken any action. Yi Xian said calmly, "Did they say why they came?" Shangguan Xian said, "They want to see you." Yi Xian thought for a moment and then said, "Tell them that I don't have time." Shangguan Xian glanced at Yi Xian, nodded, and turned to leave. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait a minute, let's go see them." It was the Dao sect's choice not to help him. The Dao sect had no obligation to help him. Moreover, the Dao sect had helped him before. They couldn't forget their kindness just because the other party didn't help him this time. Yi Xian and Shangguan Xian came to the main hall. This time, it was the Taoists' Grand Elder. Upon seeing Yi Xian, the Grand Elder cupped his fists. "King Yi! King Yi!" Now, Yi Xian's identity was not simple. Even the Taoists did not dare to look down on him. Moreover, they had to respect him in terms of etiquette. Now, Yi Xian had gathered almost all the top experts in the black-yellow great world. Not to mention the people behind Yi Xian, just Yi Xian's strength and the people around him were enough to make them fear him. Yi Xian smiled. The Grand Elder should be looking for Little Seven. The Grand Elder hesitated for a moment and then said, "Little Seven is in closed-door cultivation. I can't see him." Yi Xian nodded. "Grand Elder, why are you here this time?" The Grand Elder thought for a moment and then said, "King Yi, to be honest, I have something to ask of you this time." Yi Xian smiled. "Tell me." The Grand Elder spoke in a low voice, "We want the territory of the heaven entrance." Yi Xian's eyes narrowed slightly when he heard this. That territory could be said to be the place with the purest spiritual qi in the Xuanhuan Great World. Furthermore, it was once the lair of the Divine Hall. As a result, there was some origin violet qi of this universe there. This origin violet qi was too important to ascended seal stage experts. It could be said to be the best place in the entire Xuanhuan Great World. After all, even though Qing had destroyed all the restrictions set up by the gods of Xuanhuan Great World, there was still very little quintessence violet energy left. Because most of it had been taken away by the gods, and the few that remained were all within the heaven entrance. After the battle with the Divine Hall ended, that place had been left empty. Regardless of whether it was the Lord of Profound Illusion or the Xianyuan clan, all of them had wanted to take it, but they hadn't spoken about it. Because that place should have belonged to Yi Xian. Yi Xian had distributed the treasures within it to the various powers, so it would truly be insatiable if he asked for that place as well. However, Yi Xian hadn't expected that the Dao door would ask for the best place as soon as it arrived. Yi Xian smiled and remained silent. The Grand Elder spoke in a low voice, "King Yi, that place is extremely important to our Dao path, and we must obtain it." Yi Xian said with a smile, "Grand Elder, are you threatening me?" The Grand Elder's expression changed slightly, and he hurriedly said, "Of course not. King Yi, we have no intention of becoming enemies with you. It's just that that place is truly too important to our Dao path." Yi Xian suddenly laughed, "Grand Elder, what sort of logic is that? I think that the precious treasures and crystals of the Dao path are very important to me as well." "What? Does it mean that the Dao path should give them to me?" Hearing this, the Grand Elder's expression became a little ugly. Yi Xian chuckled, "Grand Elder, that place is not my, Yi Xian's, private property. It was exchanged for by the experts of the northern region with their lives. Do you understand what I mean?" The Grand Elder's expression became more and more ugly. He naturally knew what Yi Xian meant. In the battle with the temple, the Dao path did not contribute anything, but now they wanted the best result of the northern region. The Grand Elder sighed, "King Yi, our Dao path is not asking for that place for nothing. If King Yi gives that place to our Dao path, from now on, our Dao path will form an alliance with the northern region." Yi Xian suddenly said, "I don't need it." The Grand Elder's voice stopped abruptly. Yi Xian stared at the Grand Elder, "I don't need the Dao path." The Grand Elder's expression was a little ugly. "King Yi, little 7, Yi Xian walked in front of the Grand Elder, "Now, I am the king of the northern region. Even if little 7 agrees, I won't agree. After this term, the alliance leader will change. Maybe it will be little 7. At that time, you can go to little 7 again. But now, I don't recommend you go to her because I, Yi Xian, am in charge of the northern region." After saying that, he looked at Shangguan Xian, not far away. "Xian, entertain the Grand Elder well, don't neglect him." Shangguan Xian, nodded slightly, "Okay." Yi Xian looked at the Grand Elder, "Grand Elder, I have a lot of things to do, so I won't accompany you. Goodbye." After saying that, he disappeared. In the hall, the Grand Elder was silent and his face was a little gloomy. Shangguan Xian, suddenly said, "Your Excellency, our king is a little unhappy now. Your Excellency better not do anything bad, otherwise, things will become difficult to clean up." After a moment of silence, the Grand Elder turned and left. Shangguan Xian, looked in the direction of the Grand Elder's departure and shook her head. She had already felt that Yi Xian was angry. Yi Xian was usually cheerful, but if he was really angry, things would be very serious. Now that the black-yellow great world had been settled, she didn't want anything else to happen. After a moment, Shangguan Xian, suddenly said, "Pass down the order, pay attention to the Dao sect's movements at all times. One must always be on guard against others." In the dark, a black shadow quietly left. After Yi Xian left the hall, Zui suddenly appeared in front of him. Zui looked at Yi Xian, "Little friend, is everything over?" Yi Xian nodded, "It's almost over." Zui nodded slightly, "Then I'll have to trouble you to come with me." Yi Xian asked, "Senior, who are we going to save?" Zui whispered, "An Earth Immortal. P.S. There is one more chapter, coming out soon." Chapter 758. Earth Immortal? Yi Xian frowned slightly, "Senior, what is an Earth Immortal?" Zui said, "Let's talk while walking." Yi Xian nodded, "Okay." Soon, the two of them left Tianjiang City and entered the starry sky. In the starry sky, Yi Xian was riding his sword, and beside him was Zui. Yi Xian smiled, "Senior, what is an Earth Immortal?" Zui thought for a while, and said, "A special realm." Yi Xian frowned slightly, "A special realm?" Zui nodded, "A legendary realm, which is a special realm above the unknown realm. Above the unknown realm is creation. The so-called creation is to reach the limit of one's body, to reach the limit of the body and soul. To put it simply, the body and soul are perfectly fused. The experts of this realm have extremely strong soul and body. It can be said that as long as they don't want to die, it is very difficult to die. The white-robed man, the servant of the deity in the temple, should be in this realm. When he attacked, the power of his soul and body were almost perfectly fused. Speaking of this, he paused slightly, and said, "If he hadn't met someone he shouldn't have met, we wouldn't have been able to kill him even if we gathered all of our strength." Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Not to mention creation, even deity was beheaded by her sword. At this time, Zui said, "And this Earth Immortal is after reaching creation, there is another breakthrough, directly breaking through the mortal body, and reaching the legendary Earth Immortal realm. Yi Xian asked, that is, above the creation level? Zui nodded. Above the creation realm is the earth immortal. Reaching the earth immortal means that the corporeal body has already left the mortal body. Experts in this realm can easily destroy a world with a wave of their hand. Moreover, they are even more difficult to kill. At least some legendary divine weapons can harm their corporeal body. Yi Xian suddenly asked, Senior, the woman in the plain dress and the woman who killed the deity in a second, what are their realms? Zui was silent. Yi Xian asked again, why? Zui shook his head. I don't know what realm the two of them are at. They are abnormally strong. Something was not right. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Needless to say, no matter if it was the woman in a simple dress or the Qing, both of them were really too ridiculously strong. In Yi Xian's impression, these two women would attack anyone with one sword, never unleashing a second strike. Because of this, their strength had always been a mystery. They had no idea where their limits were. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and asked, Senior Zui, what level of expert was that god from before? Zui thought for a moment and then said, this person did not make a move, I do not know, he did not make a move. Yi Xian's expression turned odd. Zui's expression was a little strange, a god didn't even have the chance to attack. It should be said that as soon as the opponent made a move, he was instantly killed. Under such circumstances, how could he know his opponent's strength? Zui shook his head. Ever since he saw the woman in the plain dress and the woman from before, he suddenly realized that he seemed to still be in the legendary novice village. In terms of martial arts, he was still just a novice. Was this an illusion? Yi Xian suddenly asked, Senior Zui, is the temple the strongest in the four-dimensional universe now? How is that possible? Zui looked at Yi Xian. The temple's strength is naturally not weak, but they are not the strongest in the four-dimensional universe. Yi Xian hurriedly asked, there are other forces? Zui nodded, as far as I know, there are two places that are not weaker than this temple. One is from a very distant life star field. There is a life-forbidden zone there. It is said that the Life Lord has rushed through the five-dimensional universe twice. His strength. I'm afraid he has reached an extremely terrifying existence. Yi Xian asked, is he as strong as that woman in the plain dress? Zui hesitated and then said, probably not. Yi Xian nodded slightly, what about the second one? Zui said softly, Dual Realm Sky. Yi Xian frowned slightly, what is that place? Zui said, a place where almost all the top experts in the four-dimensional universe gather. Those who go there, their goal is the five-dimensional universe. That is a particularly tragic place. Many experts rush into the five-dimensional universe. Some can survive, but most die there. Speaking of this, he slightly paused and then said, the person I brought you to see is someone who failed to rush into the five-dimensional universe, causing his body to be damaged. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, can an earth immortal create the five-dimensional universe? Zui said with a smile, break through yourself and pursue the limit. Many times, if people don't force themselves, they will never know how good they are. Yi Xian nodded, that's true. He agreed with Zui's words very much. A person's potential was really endless. However, it was often only in desperate situations that this potential would be stimulated. Zui suddenly looked at Yi Xian, little friend, you have this kind of strength at such a young age. I have to say, it is very rare. Yi Xian said with a smile, I still need someone to help me. If it wasn't for the help of the plain-dressed woman and Qing heir, he was afraid he would have died 100 times. Zui shook his head, the strength of Deity Templar is not something you can match. With your potential, in the near future, Deity Templar will not be able to do anything to you. Yi Xian said with a smile, let's see if they will let me live until then. Zui nodded, that's true. If I were deity Templar, I would absolutely not let you continue to grow. Speaking of this, he glanced at Yi Xian. Little friend, the road ahead is not smooth. You still need to work hard. Yi Xian said with a smile, of course. Saying that, he looked at the distant starry sky. Senior, is this earth immortal senior easy to get along with? Zui glanced at Yi Xian. He may not be easy to get along with before, but now, he should not dare. He should not have any malicious intent towards you. He did not forget what the plain-dressed woman said at that time. Yi Xian hesitated, and then said, you also know that I have a fifth-dimensional treasure. The opponent, it was not that he was afraid, but if he saved an enemy, it would be a pain in the ass. Zui said with a smile, he won't. Saying that, he looked into the distance. He's here. Saying that, Yi Xian looked up. Not far away, there stood a man wrapped in a shroud. In the man's body, he felt a sword chi. A powerful sword chi. At this time, the shroud man looked at Yi Xian. Little friend, thank you for your trouble. Yi Xian walked in front of the shroud man. Senior, how can I help you? The shroud man said, just get rid of the sword chi in my body. Yi Xian nodded slightly. He opened his palm, and in an instant, the sword chi in the shroud man's body flew into his palm. At this time, the shroud man regained his freedom, and a powerful aura came out of his body. This aura suddenly disappeared when it approached Yi Xian. After a moment, the shroud man looked at Yi Xian, and said with a smile, little friend, are you master and disciple with that plain-dressed woman? Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then said, half. He always felt that the plain-dressed woman's relationship with him was not like that of a master and disciple, but a bit like that of a relative. The shroud man nodded slightly. No matter what, thank you little friend for coming to help this time. Yi Xian said with a smile, it's a small matter. If there is nothing else, Junior will take his leave. After saying that, he was about to leave. He had never thought of building a relationship with such a formidable martial artist. Because their strengths were not equal, it was enough to form a good relationship. At this time, the shroud man suddenly said, little friend, please wait. Yi Xian stopped and turned to look at the shroud man. Senior? The shroud man smiled slightly. I am Guan Jun, and everyone calls me Guan Xian. Yi Xian nodded. Is there something Senior Guan Xian needs? Guan Jun nodded. Little friend, I cannot let you come here for nothing. How about this? I want to go to a mystic realm. If you have nothing else to do, you can come with me. There might be a fortuitous encounter there. Mystic realm? Yi Xian asked, what mystic realm? Guan Jun smiled, a special mystic realm. I am also going to try my luck and see if there is a fortuitous encounter there. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then said, that is a good thing. Junior is willing to go with Senior. Fortuitous encounter. He was now at the Thear-cranked realm. Guan Jun laughed, all right, let's go then. As he spoke, the three disappeared into the distant starry sky. Black-yellow great world. Shengguan Xian, and Jiangjiu were handling government affairs in the main hall. Now that all the major forces in Black-yellow great world had formed an alliance, there were many more things to deal with than before. Yi Xian and Little Seven were completely in charge of the affairs of the North Alliance. Yi Xian and Little Seven basically did not deal with the internal affairs of the North Alliance. It was all handled by the two of them. The two women's current status and identity were very special in the Xianhuang Great World. Although they were not very strong, no one dared to look down on them. Even the Xianyuan clan and the other clan leaders of the major forces were very polite when they saw them. On this day, the Dao faction's Grand Elder came to Tianjiang City once again. Grand Elder was just about to enter the main hall when a northern region martial artist blocked his way. This is an important place. You are not allowed to trespass. Grand Elder said in a low voice, please inform the God Nation's Divine Master Little 7 that someone from the Dao faction requests an audience. That northern region martial artist shook his head. His Majesty Little 7 is in seclusion and is temporarily unable to receive guests. Grand Elder frowned slightly, still in seclusion? As he spoke, he looked into the main hall, then please inform King Yi. That northern region martial artist shook his head again. King Yi is currently not in the city. He is unable to see you. Not in the city. Grand Elder's eyes narrowed slightly. After a moment of silence, he turned and left. Soon, Grand Elder came to a place in the clouds. Not far in front of him stood a middle-aged man. This person was the Dao faction's current sect master, Jiang Wu. Grand Elder walked in front of Jiang Wu and said in a low voice, Yi Xian is not in the city. Little 7 is in seclusion. This is our chance. P.S. Sorry, I worked too late last night and couldn't wake up early today. Sorry. Chapter 759. Hearing the Great Elder's words, Jiang Wu looked at him coldly. How stupid are you? The Great Elder's face was full of astonishment. Patriarch, Jiang Wu looked down at Tianjiang City and said softly, don't you know how strong the northern region is now? Not to mention the person behind Yi Xian, the experts in the northern region are enough to deal with our Dao sect. Besides, Yi Xian might look harmless, jovial, and frivolous, but deep down, he was a ruthless person. We didn't help him before, but now we come to ask for benefits. He is already a bit unhappy. If we use force now, with his personality, I'm afraid he will directly destroy our Dao sect. Destroy Dao sect. In the past, Yi Xian would definitely not be able to do it. But now, the northern region could do it. Moreover, not to mention the mysterious killing goddess, Jian Zizai and Ah Zui were enough to give Dao sect a headache. The Great Elder said in a deep voice, are we just going to give up like this? Jiang Wu shook his head. We can't give up, but we can't use force. We can only use force. Let's start with Shao Qi. Wait for her to come out of seclusion. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared. The Great Elder glanced at Tianjiang City, then turned around and left. Just after the two left, a woman suddenly appeared in the field. It was Qiao Tian-er. Qiao Tian-er looked in the direction the two left with cold eyes. After a moment, Qiao Tian-er turned around and left. At the end of the distant starry sky, Yi Xian was flying on his sword. Beside him was Ah Zui. Yi Xian didn't know where he was now. In any case, he just followed Guan Jun. Along the way, he found that Guan Jun was also a person who was easy to get along with and basically answered all his questions. He also gained a lot from following Guan Jun. At this moment, Guan Jun suddenly said, little friend, do you have that fifth-dimensional treasure on you? Yi Xian looked at Guan Jun and said with a smile, Senior knows this treasure? Guan Jun nodded. I have heard of it. Yi Xian smiled. That treasure is indeed in my hands. Guan Jun looked at Yi Xian, little friend, this item is extraordinary, many people covet it, little friend. When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something and shook his head with a smile. If they come looking for you, then they're overestimating themselves. A woman in a plain dress. Guan Jun's heart palpitated at the thought of that woman. With this woman around, those people who came looking for trouble with Yi Xian were really courting death. He didn't feel the slightest bit of resentment towards being defeated by the woman in a simple dress. Conversely, he was slightly grateful. The other party had made him understand what it meant by there would always be someone better than you. After that battle, his current state of mind was completely different from before. Before, he was a glass full of water, but now, this glass of water had been emptied by him. This was a fresh start. Guan Jun collected his thoughts and asked, little friend, is she from the fifth dimension? Yi Xian shook his head. No. Guan Jun nodded slightly. He was about to say something, but at this moment, he seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly looked up. At the end of the starry sky, there stood a towering ancient tree. This ancient tree was enormous, covering the entire starry sky, blocking out the sun and sky. This ancient tree stood in the starry sky, exuding a strange aura around it. Beside Yi Xian, Guan Jun said softly, "We're here." Yi Xian said in a deep voice, "Senior, what is this?" Guan Jun said softly, "The divine tree of life." The divine tree of life? Yi Xian looked at the ancient tree. "I've never heard of it." Guan Jun smiled. "It's normal that little friend has never heard of it. Not many people know of it. This tree is not simple, because it's the earliest tree in our fourth dimension." Yi Xian was a little surprised. "The earliest tree?" Guan Jun nodded. "The reason why this tree is not simple is because it has the water of life, which is a good thing. It can heal all injuries in the world. To be honest, this time I came to find this water of life, to repair my body and soul. I hope I can gain something this time." After saying this, he walked into the distance. Just as Yi Xian was about to follow, Guan Jun suddenly said, "Little friend, please wait, this tree is not something you can fight now." Yi Xian nodded and retreated. Guan Jun suddenly appeared in front of the divine tree of life. At this moment, the divine tree suddenly wriggled, and as it wriggled, a monstrous pressure directly crushed towards Guan Jun. Boom! The surrounding space was like boiling water, extremely frightening. Yi Xian's expression instantly became solemn. This tree was not ordinary. Not far away, Guan Jun waved his right hand, and a powerful force directly blocked the pressure. Guan Jun looked at the divine tree of life. "Your Excellency, I only ask for a little bit of the divine tree of life. If your Excellency is willing to help, I will owe your Excellency a favor, and I will repay it in the future." At this moment, an ancient tree face suddenly appeared above Guan Jun's head, looking at Guan Jun coldly. "Leave my territory." Guan Jun slightly pondered. "Your Excellency, can't you make an exception for once?" The corner of the tree face's mouth curled into a sneer. "Make an exception? You humans are greedy by nature, will you be satisfied if I give you a little?" Guan Jun solemnly said, "I only ask for a little bit of healing." The tree face was expressionless. "No, not even a drop." Guan Jun slightly narrowed his eyes, slowly clenching his right hand. The tree face coldly said, "Human, not to mention the current you, even at your peak, you can't do anything to me. If you don't want to be injured, you'd better leave now." Guan Jun clenched his hands, silent. "Injury." Guan Jun solemnly said, "Your Excellency, my injury can only be healed by this water of life. If I give up, what awaits me is a slow death." In other words, he was going all out. The tree face stared at Guan Jun. "You can try." Guan Jun slightly nodded. "My apologies." With that, he suddenly disappeared on the spot. The next moment, a powerful force swept toward the tree of life. Rumble. In the distance, the space violently surged. At this moment, the branches of the divine tree of life suddenly surged towards Guan Jun. In an instant, Guan Jun was enveloped by the branches and explosions resounded. Yi Xian and Azui's expressions became extremely solemn. The tree of life's strength was much, much stronger than they had imagined. Suddenly, there was a sudden explosion in the distance, followed by a figure hurriedly retreating. This person was Guan Jun. Soon, Guan Jun stopped, a smear of blood slowly flowing from the corner of his mouth. Defeated. Guan Jun stared at the tree of life in the distance, his eyes filled with dread. At this moment, he finally understood why no one had coveted this tree of life. Because it was strong enough. The tree face glanced at Guan Jun. "I won't see you out." At this moment, it suddenly looked at Yi Xian. a trace of surprise flashing in its eyes. Human, why do I sense a familiar aura on you? A familiar aura? Guan Jun and Zui looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian was a little confused. A familiar aura? I'm not familiar with this guy. At this moment, the tree face suddenly approached Yi Xian, startling Yi Xian. Fortunately, this guy didn't seem to have any ill intentions. The tree face stared at Yi Xian. You have her aura on you. Yi Xian hesitated, then asked, who? The tree face said in a low voice, do you know a little furry white guy? Yi Xian was stunned, then quickly said, is it that little guy who especially likes to eat candied haws? Candied haws. The tree face nodded, yes. Yi Xian said seriously, I know her. The tree face glanced at Yi Xian, are you very familiar with her? Yi Xian said seriously, of course, I'm very familiar with her. I've treated her to candied haws. The tree face was silent for a moment, then asked again, who else is with her? This guy doesn't believe me. Yi Xian said, there's a swordsman with her. Oh, there's also a little girl with horns on her head, right? The tree face looked at Yi Xian and didn't say anything. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly asked Xiao Linger to take out the sword of the man in green at the top of the tower. When it saw the sword, the tree face's expression suddenly changed. You actually have his sword. Yi Xian nodded, yes, we're very familiar with each other. The tree face was silent. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then said, Senior, my friend is injured. If it's not too much of a problem, could you give him some spring of life to heal? Hearing Yi Xian's words, Guan Jun was slightly startled. He glanced at Yi Xian, but didn't say anything. The tree face was silent for a moment, then said, it's not difficult. It's just a little spring of life. Guan Jun looked at the tree face. At this moment, 2 emerald green liquids suddenly floated in front of Guan Jun's spring of life. Seeing these 2 drops of spring of life, Yi Xian was moved. The energy contained in these 2 drops of spring of life was too pure. If he absorbed it, it would definitely be of great benefit. Guan Jun glanced at the tree of life and slightly cupped his fists, thank you. After saying that, he put away the 2 drops of spring of life, then looked at Yi Xian again, little friend Yi, words cannot express my gratitude. I, Guan Jun, will remember this favor. Yi Xian smiled, it's just a small matter. Guan Jun nodded, shall we leave now? Wait. At this moment, the tree of life suddenly said. The 3 of them looked at the tree of life, and the latter looked at Yi Xian, I want to invite you to come to the tree hall for a gathering. Yi Xian asked, alone? The tree face nodded. Guan Jun frowned slightly. At this moment, the tree face said in a deep voice, I won't hurt him. I mean him no harm. Guan Jun thought for a moment, then sent a voice transmission to Yi Xian using Xian Qi, little friend, this may be your opportunity. Go with him, and if you encounter any danger, you can inform me. Yi Xian nodded, then he followed the tree face into the distance. Zui suddenly said, will there be danger? Guan Jun shook his head, it won't play any tricks. Saying that, he looked at Yi Xian's back and whispered, this little friend is not simple. Zui nodded in agreement. Soon, Yi Xian followed the face to the center of the tree. There was a treehouse at the center of the tree. At this moment, a voice sounded from the treehouse, I didn't expect to see the son of an old friend here. Chapter 760. Son of an old friend? Yi Xian was stunned. At this moment, the voice sounded again. Come in. Yi Xian walked into the treehouse. In the inner room of the house sat a woman. There was a curtain in front of the woman, and Yi Xian could not see her true face. He did not probe with his divine sense because it was impolite. Yi Xian said solemnly, what did Senior mean by that? The woman smiled and said, "You don't know?" Yi Xian frowned slightly. "What should I know?" The woman was silent for a moment, then said, "Nothing, since you don't know, then I won't say anything more. You will understand everything in the future." Yi Xian, the woman smiled and said, "Since you are the son of an old friend, I can't let you return empty-handed. Ashu, take him to the heart of the spring." A trace of surprise flashed in the eyes of the tree face, but it did not think much and nodded immediately, "Yes." After saying that, it looked at Yi Xian, "Your Excellency, please come with me." Yi Xian glanced at the woman, then left with the tree face. After Yi Xian left, the woman suddenly smiled and said, "Interesting." Yi Xian followed the tree face to a small pool. When he saw this small pool, Yi Xian was stunned. Spring of life. A full pool. Yi Xian was a little jealous. At this moment, the tree face suddenly said, "Go down." "Go down?" Yi Xian was stunned, then said excitedly, "Are you giving it all to me to drink?" The corner of the tree face's eye twitched slightly. "I want you to go down and wash your body, not drink it all." It turned out to be a misunderstanding. Yi Xian smiled awkwardly, then said, "This can wash the body?" The tree face nodded, "Go down." Yi Xian nodded slightly, and without saying anything, he jumped directly in. Comfortable. This was Yi Xian's first feeling. At this moment, he felt warm all over, very comfortable. On the side, the tree face looked at Yi Xian and did not speak. At this time, Xiaolinger suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian. She glanced at the spring of life and blinked her eyes. Yi Xian hurriedly said, "Don't mess around." She had already let him soak in the spring. If he did anything else, it would be a little immoral. Xiaolinger was still blinking. If this spring of life was used to water the spirit tree and refine pills, thinking of this, Xiaolinger's eyes sparkled. Yi Xian knew that this little fellow did not intend to give up on the spring of life. Just as he was about to speak, Xiaolinger suddenly looked at the tree face. "Can you give me some spring water?" "Not too much, just half will do." "Half?" Yi Xian was dumbfounded. "This is not a lot." The corner of the tree face eyes twitched. "This is not much?" Xiaolinger blinked. "Is that a lot?" "I only want half." The tree face looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian turned his head, indicating that he did not know this little fellow. The tree face was silent. Xiaolinger suddenly clenched her small fists. "Are you not going to give it to me?" The tree face looked at Xiaolinger. "Are you going to rob it?" Xiaolinger nodded honestly. "I have this idea." Yi Xian, the tree face suddenly smiled. "How are you going to rob it?" Xiaolinger said softly. "Then I will really rob it." The tree face nodded and smiled. "You can rob it. As long as you can rob it, it is yours." On the side, Yi Xian, who was about to speak, suddenly shut his mouth. Qingcheng, Yi family, ancestral temple. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be removed and Yi Lang will succeed him. The one who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a young man with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi family elders. "Why?" At this moment, a somewhat timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone looked at the voice and saw a little girl standing at the door. The little girl was about 12 or 13 years old. Her two small hands were tightly holding the hem of her skirt. Her face was sickly pale, looking a little weak, and there was a trace of timidity in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's biological sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince, why did you remove him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly, this is a family matter, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the Great Elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and entered the ancestral temple. She bowed again to the elders on both sides, Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the family is using a groundless excuse to remove him from the position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he is removed or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, you should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then do it 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi mansion rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, this is not fair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years, even now he is fighting for the family. The family is so unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard laughed coldly, young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of crown prince. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry. She only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Long sized up the guard and asked with a smile, what's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed, subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, you're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply, this subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded slightly, drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Do not hold back. Understood? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to see something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage, who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Yi Ling's face turned ugly. Yi Xian raised his head to look at Yi Ling and snarled, your men. As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling in such a state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors above, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and said timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is a prince, why did you discard him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, why are you interrupting? Leave." Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the great elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides. "Elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and we do not know if he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to discard his position. This is unfair. Impudent." The great elder suddenly raged. "Discard him or not, it is not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "She should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog her 30 times. Soon, 2 guards of the Yi clan rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years. Even now, he is risking his life for the clan. The clan is so unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you shouting about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry. She only held her cheek tightly. Yi Long sized up the guard and asked with a smile, "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince." Yi Lang nodded slightly. "Drag him out. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't show mercy. Understood?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a sinister smile. Inside the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger, leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pang! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. However, Yi Ling did not stop there. He charged at Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you?" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian looked up at him and snarled, "Your man." As he spoke, he stepped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu. As he walked up to Yi Ling, seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Chapter 761. Decent person? The corner of the purple-robed woman's mouth raised slightly. "I just said there are many beautiful women there. I didn't say what you should do. What are you thinking?" Yi Xian, the purple-robed woman, shook her head. "Let's go." After saying that, she turned and left. Yi Xian said, "Senior, I want to say goodbye to my friend." In the distance, the purple-robed woman's voice came, "Hurry up." Yi Xian nodded. Yi Xian found the tree face. "Senior, thank you." If the tree face insisted on him returning the spring of life, he would still return it. One can be shameless, but one must have a bottom line. The tree face nodded slightly. "It's just a small matter." Yi Xian shook his head. "It's not a small matter. In short, I, Yi Xian, will remember this favor." The tree face glanced at Yi Xian and nodded slightly. "Little friend, take care." Yi Xian cupped his fists. "Let's meet again in the future." After saying that, he turned and left. Looking at Yi Xian's departing figure, the tree face was silent for a long time, shook its head, and turned to leave. As the purple-robed woman said, it would be good karma. As for what would happen in the future, only God knows. After Yi Xian left the God Tree of Life, he found Azui and Guan Jun. Seeing that Yi Xian was safe, Guan Jun and Azui looked relieved. Yi Xian flicked his finger, and 2 jade bottles fell in front of Guan Jun and Azui. Guan Jun and Azui glanced at it, and their expressions changed slightly. These 2 jade bottles were full of spring of life. Yi Xian said, "2 seniors, this thing should be very useful to you." Guan Jun said in a deep voice, "Little friend, your gift is too big. Spring of life. That was a holy healing medicine. In a fight, if one of them took a drop of spring of life after fighting to a certain extent, it could almost be said to be full of blood. The value of this full bottle of spring of life was truly immeasurable." Yi Xian smiled and said, "There's nothing heavy about it. If Senior didn't bring me here, I wouldn't have this fortuitous encounter either. In short, please don't refuse." Guan Jun thought about it and nodded. "Thank you very much." With that, he put away the bottle of spring of life. Yi Xian looked at Azui. Azui hesitated and then put it away. This thing was really important to him. With this spring of life, there was a very good chance that he could recover from his crippled body. A divine item like the spring of life was something he didn't even dare to think about. After all, the tree of life strength wasn't something he could contend against. Was this good karma? Zoe glanced at Yi Xian. He didn't refuse and put away the jade bottle. He didn't say thank you, because he couldn't express his gratitude with words. Yi Xian smiled. Seniors, I'm going to a place with a senior. So, let's say goodbye here. Guan Jun nodded slightly. Little friend has a treasure. No matter who you are with, it's best to be careful. Yi Xian nodded. Thank you for the reminder. Seniors, farewell. With that, he turned and left. In the same place, Guan Jun suddenly said, he has a grudge with the temple? Zoe nodded. Guan Jun said, since we have nowhere to go, why not go to the black-yellow great world for a stroll? What do you think? Zoe thought about it. Okay. Soon, the two disappeared. Yi Xian found the purple-clothed woman. He still couldn't see her appearance. He couldn't sense her strength either. On the way, the purple-clothed woman flew in the air. Yi Xian followed beside the purple-clothed woman. Senior, where are we going? The purple-clothed woman said, you'll know when we get there. Yi Xian said, can't you say? The purple-clothed woman smiled. Let me ask you a question. Yi Xian nodded. Senior, please ask. The purple-clothed woman asked, do you hate your father? Yi Xian was stunned. He didn't expect the purple-clothed woman to ask this. The purple-clothed woman said, why? Yi Xian thought about it and said, I've never thought about this. To put it simply, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. As for father, he and Yi Ling didn't have any concept. The brother and sister were used to relying on each other. The purple-clothed woman was silent for a moment and then sighed. Some things are more complicated than you can imagine. You've come this far, so you should understand how big this world is. You should also understand how special you are. Yi Xian frowned. I'm special? The purple-clothed woman said indifferently, aren't you? Think about all the things that have happened to you since you obtained this tower. Yi Xian said in a deep voice, Senior seems to know a lot of things I don't. The purple-clothed woman smiled. Yes. Yi Xian asked, Senior, do you know the plain-clothed woman? The purple-clothed woman suddenly stopped and fell silent. Yi Xian asked again, do you know her? The purple-clothed woman nodded. I know her. Yi Xian said, I want to know about Dao Yi. The purple-clothed woman smiled. About her, what do you want to know? Yi Xian asked, what does Senior know? The purple-clothed woman said, she almost destroyed a universe with one sword. Yi Xian, the purple-clothed woman suddenly looked at Yi Xian. Live well. When that woman goes crazy, she can destroy this four-dimensional universe. Yi Xian hesitated and said, although she has a bad temper, she shouldn't be that crazy, right? The purple-clothed woman smiled. Not that crazy. When that woman becomes ruthless. She shook her head. Let's not talk about her. Yi Xian, the purple-clothed woman smiled. Back to the topic, if you see your father, what will you do? Yi Xian smiled. I haven't thought about it, and I don't want to think about it. He looked at the purple-clothed woman. Senior, who are you? The purple-clothed woman smiled. Someone who is related to you. Yi Xian was about to ask something when the purple-clothed woman suddenly said, we're here. Yi Xian looked up. In the starry sky not far away, there was a huge statue. On the statue's shoulder, there was a furry little white guy. This statue was not unfamiliar to Yi Xian. It was the statue of the green-clothed man. It was that green-clothed swordsman again. Behind this green-clothed swordsman was an ancient temple floating in the starry sky. Flying swords flew above the temple from time to time. Yi Xian looked at the purple-clothed woman. Sword sect? The purple-clothed woman nodded. Sword sect. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Senior, why are there so many sword sect in this universe? Moreover, the founder of this sword sect is this green-clothed man. The purple-clothed woman smiled. Because he is the sect leader of these sword sect founders. Therefore, after these sect leaders established the sword sect, they only respect one person as the founder, and that is him. Yi Xian said in a deep voice. Where is he now? The purple-clothed woman shrugged. I don't know. Yi Xian, the purple-clothed woman said. Let's go. After that, the two walked to the statue of the green-clothed man. The purple-clothed woman looked at the statue, then her eyes fell on the little white guy on the statue's shoulder. Seeing this little white guy, the purple-clothed woman smiled. I quite miss this little guy. After that, she walked towards the ancient temple in the distance. Yi Xian glanced at the little white guy. He is familiar with this little white guy. This little guy seems to be very familiar with Xiaoling. Moreover, this little white guy likes to eat candied haws. Candied haws. Yi Xian shook his head with a smile, and then he walked over. Before long, Yi Xian and the purple-clothed woman arrived in front of the ancient temple. The sword sect is empty. There is not a single person here. It is very cold and deserted. Yi Xian said softly. Senior, what is this sword sect? The purple-clothed woman said. They are gone. After that, she shook her head slightly. Nothing is eternal. After that, she walked quickly into the ancient temple. Yi Xian followed her. After entering the ancient temple, Yi Xian found that the ancient temple is very empty. Yi Xian glanced at the surroundings. In the end, his gaze fell on the 3 wooden puppets on the right. He has seen such wooden puppets in the past. There is one in the World Prison Pagoda. However, that wooden puppet is unable to keep up with his strength. Meanwhile, the purple-clothed woman suddenly said. Wooden sword puppets. As she spoke, she walked over to the 3 wooden puppets and smiled. They are still intact. Yi Xian pointed at the 3 wooden puppets. Senior, do you want them? The purple-clothed woman laughed. I don't want them. You can have them. Yi Xian didn't refuse and directly took them. The purple-clothed woman smiled. Come with me. As she spoke, she walked to the left. Soon, she brought Yi Xian to an inner hall. There were 7 statues in this inner hall. 2 of them were women and 5 of them were men. Each of them had a sword hanging from their waists. Yi Xian looked at the purple-clothed woman. This is? The purple-clothed woman said softly. In the past, some experts of this sword sect, Yi Xian grinned. Inheritance, right? Inheritance. He loved inheritance. The purple-clothed woman nodded slightly. Your sword Dao is too complicated. You need someone to sort it out for you so that you have a clear understanding of sword Dao. You can't just blindly practice like this. As she spoke, she looked at Yi Xian. Your current battle strength is all because of the pile of divine armors and divine skills. But in terms of sword Dao, you are like a rookie. Actually, it's normal. How could that plain-clothed woman understand these basic things? She can only give you a general direction. Later, learn well and ask carefully, understand? Yi Xian nodded. Understood. He felt that the purple-clothed woman was right. He was really confused about sword Dao now. When he fought now, it was all about equipment and divine skills. If this went on, it definitely wouldn't work. Because sword Dao would stagnate. As for divine armors and divine skills, if one didn't have the support of a powerful sword Dao, then the battle strength they could bring forth would be limited. The purple-clothed woman didn't say anything. She just waved her right hand. The 6 statues suddenly trembled violently. After that, 6 illusory figures appeared in the sky above the statues. The 6 of them looked at the purple-clothed woman. One of the old men suddenly said with shock, You are. Chapter 762. The corners of the woman's mouth lifted slightly. Who am I? The old man took a deep look at the woman before bowing slightly. He did not say anything else. The woman smiled, I've found a successor for all of you. The old man and the others looked at Yi Xian when they heard this. In next to no time, a wisp of surprise flashed in their eyes. The old man who was the leader of the group directly appeared before Yi Xian. He grabbed Yi Xian's arm and a mysterious force instantly surged into Yi Xian's body. A short while later, the old man was shocked. This is that bloodline, the woman nodded. There's no need to doubt his identity. This little fellow has only come into contact with the sword Dao for a short time, so his understanding of it isn't very high. The 6 of you should help him sort it out so that he has a new understanding of the sword Dao. The old man sized up Yi Xian. His sword Dao, why is it different from the founding ancestor's sword Dao? The woman smiled. It was someone else who led him onto the path of the sword Dao. However, that person's attainments in the sword Dao are too high, so he only gave him a clear path. As for these low-level things, that person clearly has no interest in caring about them. He's been letting him ponder them on his own. However, he doesn't seem to be very good at it. His sword is too complicated and not pure enough. Moreover, this little fellow is quite confused about the sword Dao. Help him sort it out so that he can understand the system of the sword Dao. The old man nodded. Since he's his descendant, we will naturally do our best to help him. The woman nodded. She looked at Yi Xian. Learn well and ask well. Yi Xian bowed slightly. Understood. The woman did not say anything else. She turned and left. Yi Xian looked at the 6 of them and bowed respectfully. Thank you, seniors. In front of Yi Xian, the old man looked at Yi Xian. What is swordsmanship? Yi Xian thought about it and said, I don't know. The others were speechless. Yi Xian felt quite awkward. In truth, he did not know what the sword Dao was either. He had never thought about it. Sword doctrine? In his heart, the sword could kill enemies and protect his loved ones. That was all. As for the rest, he really didn't think too much about it. At this moment, a woman beside the old man suddenly said, not knowing might not be a bad thing. The old man nodded. Indeed. As he spoke, he looked at Yi Xian. Sit down cross-legged, calm your qi in focus. We will communicate spiritually with you. After Yi Xian sat down cross-legged, images of the 6 people appeared in his mind. The old man said, the general direction of your sword Dao isn't wrong, but it's slightly lacking in the details. Let me tell you about the realms of the sword Dao. The realms of the sword Dao are roughly divided into 6, simple, void, true, clear, broken, and mortal. These 6 realms represent a person's attainments in the way of the sword. Your current attainments in the way of the sword are at the void realm. Yi Xian was stunned. So low? The old man smiled and said, strictly speaking, you haven't even reached emptiness. Yi Xian fell silent. The old man continued. Let me tell you about the 6 realms of the sword Dao in detail. The first is the simple realm. It means that it's simple. A beginner in the sword Dao emphasizes on having a solid foundation and doesn't care about all those fancy things. This is actually the most unadorned because it's very simple. After the simple realm is the void realm. At this time, a sword cultivator will enter a dazzling world of the sword Dao. Because at this time, the sword cultivator will have come into contact with all sorts of fancy sword techniques or divine techniques. It's also at this time that a sword cultivator attains the void realm from the simple realm. When he spoke up to this point, he looked at Yi Xian. You're at the void realm now. The general direction of your sword Dao isn't wrong, but you've lost yourself in the void realm. In other words, you must clearly see what true is within the void, and that's the true realm. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice. How should I do that? The old man said, what's your strongest sword technique? Yi Xian thought for a moment and said, the immeasurable sword. The old man nodded. Execute it for us. The 6 of us will find your flaws and allow you to see through these obstacles. Yi Xian nodded, and then he executed the immeasurable sword. Of course, he was using his mind to visualize it and not actually executing it. If he did, then this entire place would be destroyed by this attack of his. The 6 of them fell silent after Yi Xian executed the immeasurable sword. Yi Xian was about to speak when the old man suddenly said, let's talk about your flaws instead. Yi Xian was dumbfounded. Meanwhile, one of the women smiled and said, little fellow, to tell you the truth, this sword technique of yours is practically flawless. Perhaps it is, but the 6 of us aren't able to see through it with our attainments in the sword Dao. Even though it doesn't have any flaws, you have many flaws as well. It's truly a waste for you to use such a sword technique right now. Yi Xian was speechless. The old man nodded slightly as well. Needless to say, the might of this sword technique of yours is extremely terrifying. Unfortunately, your attainments in the sword Dao and strength are rather low right now, so you're unable to bring forth its true might. Yi Xian nodded. Then please tell me about my flaws. The old man said, your flaw is that your attainments in the sword Dao are too low. What you need to do now is see through the void and attain the true. Execute another sword technique, and we'll discuss it with you. You'll understand when the time comes. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he executed the life and death sword. The old man and the others fell silent again after he performed life and death with one sword. Meanwhile, the woman who spoke earlier spoke abruptly, are you a demon? Yi Xian gazed at her and was puzzled. Senior, what do you mean? The woman shook her head. Don't you have any low-level sword techniques? Yi Xian was speechless. The woman chuckled. Those 2 sword techniques of yours aren't things that we can evaluate. Of course, while we can't evaluate sword techniques, we can evaluate people. I have to say, kid, it's quite a waste to give them to you. Yi Xian's face darkened. She's definitely trying to put me down on purpose. Meanwhile, the old man suddenly smiled. Those 2 sword techniques of yours are too high level, and they really aren't things that we can evaluate. Do you have any sword techniques of a lower level? Don't use such high-level techniques. Otherwise, we won't be able to continue our conversation. Yi Xian thought for a moment, and then he casually executed a sword technique. A short while later, the old man said, did you notice anything different? Yi Xian thought for a moment before he replied, the might of my sword technique isn't strong enough. The old man was speechless. The woman and the others shook their heads and chuckled. The old man sighed. Did you see that? You've relied heavily on such a powerful sword technique. It's not a bad thing, but you've relied too much on it and forgotten the essence of your sword Dao. Little do you know that the more powerful a sword technique is, the more it will eat away at your attainments in the sword Dao. Yi Xian nodded. He knew that he was a little reliant on sword skills like infinite sword and external items, but he had no choice. He had to rely on them because his enemies were all those old monsters. The old man said, let's start from the beginning. Soon, Yi Xian and the 6 others started to discuss, or to be more precise, they were being tamed. However, he was very happy because these 6 people's attainments in the Sword Dao far surpassed his, and the knowledge of the Sword Dao they spoke about had benefited him greatly. Just like that, time passed bit by bit, outside the hall. The woman in purple arrived at the back of the hall. There was a small bamboo house on the cliff, and there was only a tea table in the bamboo house. The woman in purple did not enter the bamboo house. She stood in front of the bamboo house in silence for a long time before she said softly, "Can the dead really come back to life?" There was no response. A moment later, the woman in purple turned and left. Inside the hall, Yi Xian was still sitting cross-legged on the ground. Just like that, time passed bit by bit, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed. During this month, Yi Xian had not left the hall, and the 6 sword sect experts around him had become more and more illusory. Another half a month passed. On this day, Yi Xian suddenly stood up, and in front of him, the 6 people had become completely illusory and were about to disappear. Yi Xian bowed respectfully to the 6 people, "Thank you, 6 seniors." The old man in the lead smiled and said, "How do you feel now?" Yi Xian said softly, "I feel like I've just started." The old man's smile became wider, "Very good, very good." Yi Xian bowed again to the 6 people, "6 seniors' great kindness, this junior will never forget." The old man smiled and said, "We're all on the same side, no need to be so polite." On the same side? Yi Xian was a little confused. The old man frowned slightly, "You don't know who you are?" Yi Xian, at this moment, the woman by the old man's side suddenly said, "He probably doesn't know." Yi Xian said, "Please enlighten me, senior." The old man hesitated and shook his head, "It's nothing. Now your path of the Sword Dao is clear, but if you want to walk this path well, you need to constantly work hard and never forget your original intention. Remember, if your original intention does not change, then you can be invincible." As soon as he finished speaking, he and the people around him disappeared completely. His original intention does not change. In the hall, Yi Xian was silent for a long time, and in the end, he turned and left. Outside the hall, he saw the woman in purple. The woman smiled and said, "How do you feel?" Yi Xian said, "I gained a lot." The woman in purple asked again, "What realm are you in now?" Yi Xian said solemnly, "True realm." He had now advanced from the void realm to the true realm. It was also at this moment that he felt that his Sword Dao had just begun because he had truly understood the essence of some things. When he executed sword techniques, he knew what was useful and what was useless. Simply put, he felt that he was now on the right track. The woman in purple smiled and said, "Very good. Let's go, I'll take you to a dangerous place now." "Dangerous place?" Yi Xian asked, "What place?" The corners of the woman's mouth curled up slightly, "The strong like that place, and the weak fear that place. P.S. Does anyone want to play a cameo? Everyone can leave their names. Thank my friends who support me, especially those who silently tipped and voted. Some friends read books without saying a word, but they've been supporting me in secret. Thank you. I've been saving manuscripts recently. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.